than the Schlieffen Plan, or rather alternative versions of the Schlieffen Plan to do the same thing as the Schlieffen Plan did, people seem to be surprised that I picked the naval option, which I'd have thought would have been quite normal. But nope, for a naval history channel. But today it's the First Fleet, the founding Australia. And I'm going to start off by giving this a little bit of a preface. 1. Due to various issues today of administration and paying taxes and sorting out why various people who are supposed to pay me money haven't paid me the money they're supposed to pay me, and a dog who's now walking around with a cone of shame on because he's managed to hurt his eye, I haven't eaten today. So food will be arriving at some point in this session. I'm not sure whether it's going to be something my sister has cooked, in which case I think I've said before exactly what her quality of cooking is like. She's very enthusiastic. She still managed to give a lot of people food poisoning, so I probably won't eat it, or it might be a takeaway from somewhere, in which case I will consume it in front of you. So I'm giving a heads up for those people, because some people don't like to see me eat when we're live. I apologise, but I haven't eaten anything other than these raisins all day. And when I say these raisins, because I've run out of snacks in my office. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 packs of them. I think. Oh, no, that's 5 packs. I'm sure it was 6 packs. No, only 5 packs. That's quite good. Or maybe I've eaten another one and I don't have eaten in the box. But, hang on. Oh, no, there is 6. There's one which is collapsed up here. So, yeah, 6 packs of 6 packs of raisins. So, yeah. Food coming. Yes. And also, because of that, instead of me... Normally I record the long patrol for the live as a sort of final practice during the Thursday, and then the live goes live and I'm all sort of that sort of practice. But I haven't had a chance to record the long patrol, because again, diving backwards and forwards to the vets, finding the right sized cone of shame. Because, believe it or not, poodles have tricky necks. And I have been told by a aforementioned poodle I am not allowed to put a picture of him in his cone of shame on here. Right then, so now I've done those sort of notes out of the way. Hello, Jack Ray. Oh, thank you for already giving someone membership. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Michael Cooch. Hello, Malaga. Hello, Knight 681. Hello, Carmen Gasberg. Hello, HMS Verdun. Hello, Alwazaski. Hello, Steve Clarke. Hello, Bichon. Hello, Bob Fry. Hello, Stephen Richards. Hello, Melanie 1640. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Tanif. Hello, DG40. Hello, Verdun. Hello, Jess P. Malaga. Hello, Dan Freeman. So we've got... Oh, there's lots of admins on as well this evening. And also, I gave this warning out earlier as a comment when I thought I was going to get lunch today. I will give this warning out now. I have today paid a tax bill of £2,000. So, please note, both the Cornish heritage in me and the Scottish heritage in me is feeling spicy this evening, to use my cousin's phraseology. As from what I've gleaned from their use of the word spicy, and please remember I am a historian, the word spicy basically means I am feeling very sarcastic and slightly on the rude side of my personality. Again, a heads up, I had to spend £2,000 on tax today. First, let's fill up my water glass. That goes in the Brewships one. Some video photographer. Normally I'm History Vanguard, but due to the the channel being me forgetting the email address, I'm no longer access it. Don't worry. Life happens. Dan, don't rub it in. You got a letter saying you don't have to do a tax return. I have to pay £400 to my accountant for sorting out the mess which the various universities have managed to make of my pay. And on top of that, the one that's caused the most trouble has also not paid me for 48 hours worth of work this month that I did last month, because they paid a month of arrears. And that means, yeah, things are tight, because I had to pay both, not a fine quite, but I had to pay extra tax because they hadn't done something right, and they also haven't paid me. And it's because they keep forgetting to pay and then doing surge amounts to make up for it, that's mucking up my taxes. Because they're managing to muck up PAYE even more than PAYE is mucked up by the fact I have about 7 jobs. And non-PAYE PAYE income. By the way, for those who don't know, because they don't have it called that in their country, PAYE is pay-as-you-earn income tax, which basically makes your life a lot easier. Thank you, Bijan. Let's please note, thank goodness for YouTube and Patreon, because without them, I don't think without them, honestly to say this, I think I would have been in serious trouble right now, thanks to some of the universities. H1, Ducks and Covers says that personal tax isn't my department, HRMC. Don't worry, you're fine. It's not HRMC's fault, and it's not. To be fair, very clear. My accountant, having this conversation with us today in work and checking things out, because of course paid the tax today, because I like to try and pay it early and get it through as quickly as possible in January so it's all done, because I'm conscientious and I like the bill done. And they were going, to be fair, this is not your fault and this is not HRMC's fault. It is squarely, insert employer's name here's fault, because they've managed to muck up the PAYE. So I'm just wondering how many of my colleagues have been similarly mucked up. Yeah, £2,000 worth of income tax. I do think of it as helping fund the warship. I do. Tanif, you're also unwell. I'm sorry to hear that. There's even a lot of people unwell. Yes. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Jess Pete. But sorry, I was saying yes to Bidron. Told you to stop eating carrots and focus on soft foods. I think Raisin Order List got the same Sunshine mini boxes. Yeah. The thing is, I was just wandering through the other day and I picked up 2 packs of these things. And it just went, yeah, them. Bourneville chocolate in the back. Yeah, that's my iron and roughage. Technically, if I want, the thing is, I could sue the employer, but then I would have to stop working for the employer, and they do pay me quite well when they do remember to pay me. So it's a case of I'm balancing the two at the moment. But believe it or not, this is not the first time they've done it. So they're on strike number 2. Strike number 3. Well, I went to school with a lot of lawyers. I was a scholarship boy, as I've said before, at a private school. We can all imagine just how many of my school friends have gone on to become lawyers and barristers. And yes, I shamelessly know which ones specialise in this sort of situation. Yes, I do. Nope, they're universities. Universities will muck up your taxes more than anyone else. Thank you, Jack Ray. You're very kind. it's let's put it this way. I had the scary experience, and I'm talking about this a bit before we start getting to explain why I might be spicy today. Of well, the thing is, you have to pay it all in cash. You can't use a credit card or anything to spread the payments out, and so depending on when your pay dates are, it goes in and you basically drain your entire account to pay the bill. Because I had one account which had the cash I'd set aside for taxes, and I had to add in a whole load extra on top of that. So yeah, that was fun. Ah. Yeah. I think the Cornish blood in me dislikes the revenue. The Cornish blood in me really dislikes the revenue. I was like, wait, so your tax officer doesn't prepare a declaration for you and you just have to sign it? No. You can get into real trouble with the UK if you don't file the taxes properly. And in my experience, my dad, who was a lot better with maths than me, misfiled a form once and ended up in having to pay thousands of pounds of fines. And a few years ago, after PAY had sort of come in and I had started earning money from multiple universities, I got sent a note from the taxman, from HRSC, saying that they thought I must owe them X amount of tax. And, well, it was more than my yearly earnings, so I knew it wasn't that case. So I tried to remonstrate with them myself in a polite and friendly fashion. That didn't work, so I ended up going to my colleagues at work and going, do you have an accountant who specialises in dealing with academics? And I did. I found one, a good firm, and I've been with them ever since. And yes, they do cost me roughly £300 to £400 a year, every year, but let's put it this way, anytime HMRC tries to play nasty games with me, because they get confused by the sheer amount of PAYE I have and the sheer amount of firms I work for, well, universities, a couple of private companies, etc., and things I work for, and even the government as well, occasionally, they deal with that. But, yeah. But I was thinking about that a lot today, and the reason I'm bringing up my tax issues is because some of the reasons why people were declared convicts to go to Australia for transportation is pretty darn interesting. But I would also add, first myth we're going to deal with, transportation does not begin with Australia. The British had been transporting criminals for years. They transported them to America. So, sorry, everyone who thinks that Australia's our only penal colony which became a country. No, America, you were there first. Just adding that point. Good accountants are definitely money well spent. I was trying to pay to other people on the Inland Revenue, but, you know, they don't allow you to. That's who you pay to. So today I've forgotten the email address for History Vanguard, and I'm feeling really low about it, but it's life. Look, you'll find it found out. If you're anything like me, you've got it written down somewhere randomly. In fact, the other day I did find, let's put it this way, I don't have my passwords written down, but I do always write down my old email addresses. And I found the list the other day in the place where I'd stored it. And it's not easy to find, because it's not in a diary or anything like that. It's on a little piece of card in the back of a book, randomly in my collection. So, my view is, if you want to search through roughly 3,500 books to find it, you can. And if you do, then you can find a list of my old email addresses. That's my version of data security. sheer needle in a haystack, and it's all not digital. But I found it. Yeah, that's it. And I was looking for it, going, oh, I remember that address. No, right. £2,000 is about $2,584.12. Yes. But in good news, most of that I'd accounted for, and most of that money was due to income from YouTube, Patreon, and books, which was really actually good. So there is a good reason for it. Let's put it this way. I'm not upset about the tax bill. There's part of me which is quite proud of it, because in the nicest way, it's because of the work I've done in things not on PAYE income. I'm annoyed by about £200 of it, which was added on because of the employer, and by the fact that the employer, that aforementioned employer, hasn't paid me, well, after tax it would have been another £600 worth of income, which means I'm £800 down on where I should have been. That's annoying me. And also just paying any large bill annoys me. Again, half Scottish, half Cornish. Roland Cash, are we allowed to mention the rather hedonistic arrival party in Lightning Storm? Yes, we can. How many prison ships sank on the way? None. That's a fun thing to work out. Right then. So, first I'm going to add a note for anyone watching, so they know to toddle off if they don't want to hear my introduction of the day. And of course, the shameless book plug. And before anyone asks, no. What I love was one of the things my calendar said to me was, so how many royalties checks so far have you received from the book? Because we've only got you down as receiving 2 checks so far. And I went, that's all I've received. 2 checks. They send them every 6 months. And I went, okay. I was sort of going, do you expect to be more often? No, but most of the authors seem to get about a check every 3 months. I went, well, I've only received them every 6 months. I went, this is not good for my morale. I will do, Jack Ray, thank you. I think this is only 3,000-bit security. You need to know a lot about behind email list amongst them. I have lots of things actually hidden amongst my books. One of the things that annoys some of my cousins quite greatly in that they sometimes come searching around the house trying to find their Christmas presents and etc. and birthday presents, and they're not sure where they are, and they're hidden behind the books. They're hidden in the books. There are quite specifically, I have built, remember, me and Drac built this room, rebuilt this entire shed, this entire office set of offices, redid all the underneath. We included hidden compartments to hide stuff in. We did. It's, before anyone from HMRC's watching gets worried, it's all for family contraband, i.e. chocolates, presents, and random things that you store because you're probably going to need them, but you don't want to admit you might need them for your family. Like, for example, for my mum, I have, and she isn't watching tonight because it's about Australia and she's busy dealing with something else with the dog, so she won't watch this one. I have 3 pairs of swimming goggles that are exactly the same as the pair she uses. Why? Because I do not know how that woman does it. I love her dearly to bits, but she will lose swimming goggles at the drop of a hat. So whenever we are going somewhere on holiday, I will have a spare pair hidden in my luggage, which look exactly the same as the pair she has. So when she loses them, I can produce a pair so she can still go swimming and be happy, and give me time to try and find the original pair which she lost. Which I find like 50% of the time. It works. It's what you do with your family. Alright. Goodness knows what I'd have done if I went to Australia in this group. Hello. Food has arrived. Thank you. Thank you.
Enough rice.
Yes, it's enough rice. Thank you. In good news for my stomach, the food that's arrived is Chinese. So, work. This is why we're doing this today, because it was on the 26th of January they arrived in Port Jackson. We got into Port Jackson early in the afternoon and had the satisfaction of finding the finest harbour in the world, in which 1,000 sail of the line may ride in most perfect security. I fixed on the one cove that had the best spring of water, and which the ships can anchor so close to the shore that at very small expense they could be attached. I wouldn't worry. I'm not exactly sure what you would have that's contraband. Too many books bored of the Force. I'm Brew and particularly rice. It's nice cheese and Rodney. Jack, right. It's funny when my family or friends come to me and say I lost X, and I already have a handout with a replacement for them to take. It works. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this fleet arriving, but the thing about the founding of Australia is it's very much a naval enterprise. It seemed perfect to go with this week's video, because this week's video was, of course, all about the creation of ships of the line, of age of sail. One of the reasons they pick and they send a colony out to Australia is because they need a base in the Far East to support operations in case the French move out here. They want a source of reliable and good quality timber in the area. They want a source of harake or flax, aka what you used to make rope, in the area. And they want sort of fresh water and a base for their ships. There's a reason why the first governors are all naval officers. The troops sent out are Marines. It's entirely a naval exercise. And very, very much so. At least you're going to Australia on a plane, not a prison ship. Well, there are going to be announcements about that soon, but we're working on that one, and I think you're going to be really excited by the announcements when they come out. Some of the stuff we've been talking about have been is really, really cool, because basically the four of us from the Canada trip have got together, and yeah. But I'm very much being under orders to try and keep as much as I can quiet. However, seeing as Dan's also in the chat, you can feel free to pester him for leaks and see if he'll give them. Now, this whole story starts in 1770 with the voyage of James Cook. Sir Joseph Banks, who was an eminent scientist who'd accompanied him, combined with Lord Sandwich, the president, Lord Sandwich, and Joseph Banks by this point was the president of the Royal Society, which is quite a powerful post. Even to this day, being president of the Royal Society does give you a lot of status. Advocated the establishment of a British colony in Botany Bay, New South Wales. Banks ended up being assisted by an American loyalist called James Matra in July 1783. And the reason was they're also looking for a colony to take the place of the penal work for transporting that they were no longer able to do in America. With Banks' guidance, Matra produced a proposal for establishing a settlement in New South Wales, published on 24th August 1783. And it was a fully developed idea of planning of colonizing it with American loyalists. The idea was to take the American loyalists, who were used to a different kind of society than Britain, but who'd fled to Britain after the end of the American Revolution, and established their own new version of what they considered America to be, which was an America but loyal to Britain in Australia. Please note, a lot of them do end up a lot of the people who end up emigrating and starting up Australia do have a lot of roots as American loyalists, which has some really interesting connotations for those people who study language and linguistics. Now, the decision to establish the colony in Australia was finally made by Thomas Townsend, Lord Sydney, Secretary of State for the Home Office. He decided this for pretty much three reasons. One, the transportation of criminals, which was a very high priority, I've already mentioned. Two, the French expanding the Pacific. And three, they needed something that could provide distant support to the Indian Ocean. They needed to be able to get supplies for the Indian Ocean fleet out from somewhere else. And the thing was, you can get a lot of supplies in India, and India produces a lot of supplies, and it's critical to starting off with the Australian colony. A lot of the early supplies, a lot of key supplies come from India. But there's also the reality that if they're cut off with certain stores which come from the UK to India, to support naval operations, especially in India and in the Indian Ocean, then they have a problem. Well, it was found on James Cook's voyage that you could probably get these stores from Australia. If you can get these stores from Australia, that's going to help. That means the suppliers can come the other way. So, Australia is entirely a strategic acquisition by the Navy. Hello, Excalibur Iron Force. Nice to go for everyone. My local Chinese takeaway shut down earlier in the month. I am so sorry to hear that. That's terrible news. No, we are not planning on coming home in a borrowed Daring class destroyer. But, in good news, they are currently in the process of painting her and polishing her and making her look all sorts of nice. So, HMS Vampire will be looking for a nice little jaunt, maybe. Excellent. I might be making the question I had on ship ratings about Industrial Revolution into a patron suggestion. I'm just trying to write it in a way which can be answered, not short enough in an on patrol. The British showing up in a big colonising fleet sounds like Avatar. Sci-fi following history. A little bit. Runcash, spoiler, the 4 Canadian ship members found robot suits and now will come together and form Voltron. I was asking, in short, loyalists were punished for not doing good enough in defending colonies from those pesky insurgents? No! They wanted to go to Australia. I just realised Australia was established as a penal colony 12 years after the US broke away. Yeah. It's really not that long when you consider it, when you consider in the whole scheme of things. Tim Richards, got to ask, not being rude, are you going to set up a PayPal account? I do have a PayPal account. Why are you asking? Cash, I thought one of the reasons for the Australian colony starting was that some potential mast-making trees were spotted on an island off the coast and north or down on land. Yes! Exactly, which is actually why it was going to be 2 colonies. There was going to be a subsidiary colony to be found on Norfolk Island. Norfolk Island was where they spotted the timber which could be used for masts, but also for decking. Because teak is very, very good, but teak is also very, very solid. And you don't really want to make masts out of teak. American Revolution wasn't over until 1783, and planning to establish Australia was 2 to 3 years later. What a coincidence. I know, it's lovely. And they start the revolution, and the British start looking at other options. Good day. The word is I was asking, perhaps it was a thought that if the colonists could cope with such exotic and dangerous wildlife as the raccoons and groundhogs, they'd be fine in Australia? Wildlife? There is all sorts of things. The word is requisition, not borrowed. In the 12 years between the colonies being fully... You're definitely playing into the whole English upper class here, aren't you, Dan? And Australia being colonised, how many people were hanged instead of just being transported? There were a fair number still hung, but one of the things I do like about this subject, and one of the things I love about any history of Australia really, is the Australian government is actually pretty good at listing things and giving information. And, for example, we know that, well, if you want to, you can actually find the details. They're listed on Wikipedia. You can find a list of the people, and it is an accurate list, broadly speaking. You can also follow the source data from that Wikipedia page down to the New South Wales State Records Convict Index, which is an absolutely beautiful resource, and a State Archives collection, and you can go through that and plan your visit and plan which convicts you're going to see and discuss, and there are a lot of them. But there were a fair number of ships to go there. They were taking 1,400 people. Okay? Let's point this out. They are taking 1,400 people, really. The whole cost of Britain outfitting and dispatching fleets was £84,000. About 9.6 million in 2015, according to someone. But according to Google today, Make sure it's 1787. Make sure it's on the right one. And make sure it's 84,000. For some reason it's set to 83,000. That would be 16.87. Well, honestly, let's be honest. Just be honest. 16.9 million. You know, you are 21 grand off 9 million of 16.9 million. It's a lot of money. But it's worth it for what they're getting. Only 26 Patreon suggestions. We are failing on duty to get your suggestions in now. Yes, please do, because the Patreon vote will be starting on Sunday. And there are plenty of good suggestions there, but I do like to have plenty to pick from. This is Clarke. Alex, you have to answer my question about mixing wood types on ships, especially when the tree type may be unknown to workmen. Remember the master craftsmen they have down there. Master craftsmen in terms of woodworkers are far more common in those times than today. And everyone sort of has a certain knowledge of wood. That is part of your life on a ship. The ship's carpenter is quite a senior NCO. Okay, or warrant officer, more like is what they should be more considered as. With a lot of specialist privileges. They have to be trusted to do their job. They'll make assessments on trees based on how it cuts, how it works when you're seasoning it, how it works when you dry it and you prepare it. Exactly. In a pinch, they'll use any wood to do the job if it works. And replace it with better wood for the job when they can. But they will study the woods and they will learn them. So, the ships. We have HMS Sirius, 20 guns, Master John Hunter, 200 crew officials and marines aboard from Portsmouth, arrived in Botany Bay on the 20th of January 1788, carrying John Hunter and, of course, carrying the new Commodore of the fleet, the Captain General and Governor-in-Chief of the new colony, Arthur Phillip, who's the first governor of New South Wales. He was supported by HMS Supply, which was an armed tender under the command of Henry Lidingbird Ball. And let's be honest, it's the reason why, to this day, the Australian Navy traditionally has a supply ship called HMS Supply somewhere knocking around in their Navy, because it's named for her. The Alexander, which I'm not at all partial to, but I'm not annoyed, also not annoyed that I can't find a picture of. A bark-rigged vessel, under the command of Master Duncan Sinclair, 30 crew officials and marines aboard. Well, let's be honest, they're mostly crew, and what's the case? You're talking marines mostly aboard Sirius, and a few aboard Supply. There's a couple aboard the transports as well with the convicts, but mostly their crew. And oh yeah, 41 marines aboard them. Sorry. I just realised that when I combined multiple tables and set it all up together, it decided to put the Marines and the From table together, and I do love PowerPoint, and I didn't notice that. Sorry. As I said, I didn't have my normal run through today, so I didn't notice that one. These are the list of Marines they had aboard. These are the list of convicts. They're over here, male convicts, female convicts, etc. Marines and crew, or basically officials and Marines and crew. Or crew, officials and Marines in the case of the first two ships. As we can see, their voyages vary between 250 and 252 days. Technically, HMS Supply was the first to arrive. She started off with no convicts aboard her, but when they grew annoying on other ships, they were transferred. And the Alexander started off with 210 aboard her. 2 were pardoned en route for good behaviour and helping. Charlotte took 100 plus 24 female convicts with them. Friendship took 80 with 24 female convicts aboard who were transferred to Lady Penryn at Good Hope because it was found that they were causing problems. It wasn't the females that were causing the problems, it was the males around the females, I think. But also some of the females, possibly, from the different reports. And then we have Lady Penryn, transporting 101 females. The Prince of Wales, which was transporting 2 male convicts and 47 female convicts. And Scarborough, which was transporting 208 males. Then we have the storeships, Golden Grove, Fishburne and Borrowdale. So this force is entirely self-supporting, and please note, they all get there. So, we have a convoy of 11 ships sent out, and all get there. That's very kind of you, Stephen Richards. The PayPal account, I think there's a link somewhere on the top up here somewhere. I know Jack Ray usually finds it. Mainly because not only does he give out memberships, he also points out to people when they hit Ko-fi and those things. He's very helpful. Okay. Is either Australia or South Africa for new penal colony? You pick, boys. Well, the thing is, the Cape Colony at this point wasn't considered a good point to send convicts because, in simple terms, it was felt that you could possibly get back by land, and it was more likely that UN might end up with fighting, and they weren't sure if they could rely on the convicts to fight for them rather than maybe assisting the French. Because if we go through the convicts and we look at where they came from and what they did, etc., and all the things, you do find some convicts which have some very interesting things. They all seem to be sentenced to at least 7 years transportation. Some are sentenced to 14 years. And what that basically means is that you can go for 7 years aboard, 7 years in the colony, and then you can either take your freedom at the colony, or you can earn your money to buy your way back to the UK. But basically, if you're transported, the odds of you getting home are very, very low. And also, please note, there was also a policy established that some of the convicts, they were convicts, but they were allowed to go take their wives and children with them for the transportation. We didn't send the convicts to Canada because, honestly, the Canadians are too nice. We wouldn't want to. Well, that would be just rude. Have you met the Canadians? They're lovely. Besides, there's also quite a healthy French population in Canada at this point as well, and that they've already have to deal with that. So sending them convicts as well is just rude. Bishop, Norfolk Island today has an airfield, but not a big pier for handling cargo ships. A forested island in the middle of the Blue Sea, lots of little houses and little forts. It is quite cool. So how can there be a bark named Prince of Wales when the 98-gun second-rate ship of the Line H Prince of Wales is still being built? Because if it's not got an HMS in front of it, it's taken up from trade. It's a merchant ship hired for the mission. Got to send some female convicts with the male convicts so they can make you some new convicts. Well, actually, believe it or not, there were a lot of discussion at this point as whether or not to send female convicts to Australia or not. And there were some who honestly felt you could establish an entire colony with just male convicts and just men. And there are some really interesting discussions in the House of Commons about this, where basically there seem to be some gentlemen who are trying to explain the facts of life to some of their colleagues in the House of Commons. And there is a story that one of the ladies who was watching, who was the wife of one of the more prominent MPs at the time, got so fed up with the opposition labouring on this point and being a bit silly that she did actually just stand up and shout out, "Because you need children, young man!" Which was a polite way of saying, do you know how to have children? In takes two to tango, sort of thing. Oh. Please note, some children were born en route. There are literally... there are children born en route. Okay. So, embarked at Portsmouth, 15 officials and passengers, 323 ship's crew, 247 marines, 46 marines' wives and children, 582 male convicts, 193 female convicts, 14 convicts' children. Landed at Sydney Cove, 14 officials and passengers, 1 died en route. 306 ship's crew. Again, some died en route. 245 marines. Again, some died en route. There were 45 plus 9 born. 9 children born from the Marines. And one of the wives died. Convicts arriving at Sydney Cove. 543 on the men. So some of them died en route. About 39, I think, roughly. Oh, hang on, no. Might be more than that. Yeah, 39, yes. 189 female convicts, so 4 of them died en route. And 11 children. So, en route, the convict children population lost 3 died, plus 11 were born, so went up by a total of 7. Overall, that's quite important because, well, of the 1,420 embarked in Portsmouth, 1,373 arrive. That thing, wasn't the journey time around 250 days? That is term of 35 weeks. Yep. Alzowski, how do you actually earn a one-way ticket to Australia this time? Find a judge who's willing to give you either a death sentence for whatever you've done, or feels that you've done such a significant crime that you are an inveterate criminal. So, the flagship was HMS Sirius, originally called the Berwick, and it has an interesting story. Some people sometimes think it's built as an East Indiaman. It's not. It's built for the eastern. It's built for the eastern trade, which is the Baltics. Which is rather appropriate for the fact it's going down to Australia because, you know, it gives it a certain strength. Anyway, unfortunately, it eventually does sink off Norfolk Island. But It has quite a good career. It's quite an interesting vessel. And it is the flagship. And when we say flagship, we are talking about a vessel which was christened Sirius in 1786, but originally in trade from 1781, originally launched in sort of 1780 as Berwick, then acquired in 1781 as HMS Berwick. Then they launch another ship called they're going to call Berwick, so she becomes Sirius. And well, her career lasts from acquired in November 1781, wrecked on the 19th of March 1790, which is a very auspicious day, and it's a sad day that the ship was lost, but it's otherwise an auspicious day. In fact, 19th of March is a really good day, and we have a brew ships on that day. Can't think why I'm attached to the ship. In other words, stealing a loaf of bread. Not quite, but not far off it. Quite a lot of poachers were sent. And amazingly, if you had skills which would be quite useful for setting up a new colony, your likelihood of getting a severe enough punishment which you'd want to turn into transportation could be quite high. Now, Sirius is nominally a sick freight to allow her to be commanded by a post captain, but she only had an armament of 10 guns. So think about that. She's made a post captain's command to allow her require a command by a full captain, but she only has 10 guns. Not exactly the biggest, most powerful ship. What about the punishment of cutting down the Royal Navy trees? That was usually more... that could be transportation at certain points, but not in this case. Now, when she sailed in 1787 as the flagship of the 11 vessel First Fleet, she was under the command, theoretically, the Commodore of the group, after Philip was aboard her, as well as John Hunter. However, Arthur Philip transfers to HMS Supply at Cape Town, and Hunter just gets command of the most powerful ship in the group on his own. Also on aboard were Royal Marine Major Robert Ross, and surgeons George Bushy-Wogan and Thomas Jameson. According to midshipman Daniel Southwell, Sirius was also carrying the Larsen Kendall K1 chronometer used by Captain James Cook on his second and third voyages around the world to help her direct and get there. She actually arrived in Botany Bay on 20th of January 1788, 2 days after Supply. And, well, the 252-day voyage had gone via Rio de Janeiro and the Cape of Good Hope and covered more than 15,000 miles. They decided when they got there that Botany Bay was unsuitable for a penal settlement and went to the alternative location. The alternative location was Sydney Cove, Port Jackson. When Governor Phillip arrived on 26th of January, aboard Supply, Sirius arrived the following day. At the same time as they were there, please note, a French expeditionary fleet of Jean-François de Galep, the Comte de la Ruse, arrived in Botany Bay. The British received the French most cordially. However, offered assistance. However, the French and British commanders never met personally. Now, Prusse also took the opportunity to send his journals, some charts, and letters back to Europe with Sirius. So they were assigned to Sirius because Sirius was supposed to be going home at some point soon. Sirius left Port Jackson under command of Hunter on the 2nd of October 1788, when she was sent back to the Cape of Good Hope to get flour and other supplies. And please note, they were still carrying aboard them these letters from La Prusse, because decades later it was discovered that La Prusse's expedition was shipwrecked on the island of Vanicaro, which, if you don't know where that is, it's in the Santa Cruz group. So it's, to an extent, one of the provinces of the Solomon Islands. And that's the French expedition to Australia, and why the French don't compete with Australia in Australia like they do in Canada, etc., because the British have got there, established themselves there, and the French attempts, well, there were wars going on which stopped the French Navy getting there, and the French early attempts, which might have gone in through pre the wars, got themselves killed. In 1789, she was refitted in Monson Bay, which was originally named the Great Sirius Cove after vessel, and then, as mentioned, in 19th March 1790, she's wrecked on a reef at Norfolk Island while landing stores. Among those who witnessed her demise was Thomas Jameson, the surgeon from the penal settlement, and Jameson would eventually become Surgeon General of New South Wales. The crew were stranded on Norfolk Island until they were rescued in 21st of February 1791. Hunter was honourably acquitted for the loss of his ship, and was appointed Philip's successor as Governor of New South Wales in February 1795, though he did not return to the colony until September 1795. One of the sailors on Sirius, Jacob Nagel, wrote one of the first-hand accounts of the ship's last voyage and wreck and crew standing. Please note, that is one thing you do have a lot of. There are a lot of accounts written by various people who were involved in this. So this is one of those things about this. When we're talking about colonization in earlier periods, we often don't have that many accounts which survive, which tell us what happened. For this colony, we actually do have a lot. Excellent. I was going to say that crimes punishments were severe in those days, but the law was starting to change to lesser punishment for lesser crime. An idea starting to come from the Navy. True. And Riemann, we've both been at sea for 8 months. We may or may not be at war. Who knows? Except roundfalls. French and Dutch were in the region long before the British. Dutch were French. French are interesting. The French claim to have been, certainly. But there are issues with it, in that I don't think they actually go as far south as Australia. And this is HMS Supply, or rather, this shows the Australians. This is what I love about them. They built their own version of HMS Supply. They basically went, you know what, we need to have one of these ships around. And this is her in Sydney Harbour in 1938. They constructed their own version of HMS Supply. Which is just cool. Now, Supply was designed in 1759 by Thomas Slade as a yacht craft for ferrying of naval supplies. She was constructed under contract by Henry Bird of Rotherhithe for a vessel measuring 168 and 2094 tons burthen, to be built in 4 months at the princely sum of £8.80 per ton. The vessel was actually built in 5 months. It's terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. %25 time overrun. It's just atrocious. Complain. Burn the yard down. The keel was laid down on the 1st of May 1759 and launched on the 5th of October. As built, the vessel was also larger than designed, measuring 174 and 76/94 tons burthen, with a length of overall of 79 foot 4 inches, that's 24.2 metres, a beam of 22 foot 6 inches, that's 6.9 metres, and a hull depth of 11 foot 6 inches, that's 3.5 metres. Think about that. Think about sailing 15,000 nautical miles around seas like the Cape of Good Hope in that. Hello. Let me just check. Make sure I get this right. And please note, I'm very happy. Someone did actually correct me today about me getting their name right, and I like to be told, because I like to try and get people's names right. But I do always say the apologies that I might get it wrong. Runon. Hello, Runon. Hope you're well. And how accurate is this copy? Very accurate. And it's going around for so true. They stayed to the north of the continent. Yeah, it's one of the things. You sit there and go, yeah, they're in this area, and that's one of the reasons why the British are expanding this area. But they don't quite go to here. So, her initial complement was 14, which rose to 55 when converted to an armed tender for the first fleet voyage in 1788. She had just 2 masts, and she was fitted with 4 3-pounder cannons, 6 half-pounder swivel guns. Her armament was increased in 1786 with the addition of 4 12-pounder carronades. She has those fitted because they're starting to consider she might be used for other voyages. Her original role was transporting naval supplies between Thames and Channel ports from 1759 to 1786. Please think about that. And this is one of the reasons it's interesting to talk about a ship. This ship is literally built by the Royal Navy to take supplies from one yard to another yard and back. Why? Because the roads aren't good. It's one of those advantages of Britain, okay? Britain as an island has a huge advantage. A huge advantage. Not only do we have large supplies of, well, relatively large supplies of iron ore, relatively large supplies of coal and wood and all these things. We, as an island, you can quite easily get from one spot to another by going around the outside. If you consider France in a similar scenario, they have to go round Spain. Not so good. Whereas, Britain can go all the way around. And they have actual ships built to go and take supplies between different yards. This literally is your equivalent of your modern day HGV that might be used to go between naval facilities with different materials aboard. That's literally what this is. Now, supply was under the command of Captain Arthur Phillip, who transferred aboard at Cape Town, from Sirius at Cape Town. But she was captained by Henry Lingbird. The master was David Lingbird Ball, and the master was David Blackburn, and surgeon was James Callan. Supply was used as the first ship because she was actually considered one of the fastest ships in the fleet, and that's why Philip wanted to move aboard her. Because Philip thought, well, he should be at the head of his group. Supply, when she gets there, becomes the link between the colony and Norfolk Island. She makes 10 trips between the two. Following the loss of Sirius in 1790, she becomes the colony's only link with the outside world. Again, making round trips. In 17th April 1790, she sent to Badvia for supplies, returning on 19th September. Her captain chartering a Dutch vessel, the Waxhamheld, to follow with more stores. Waxhamheld? So, again, you're using other colonies. You're using a Dutch colony to get more stores. Supply left Port Jackson on the 26th of November 1791, sailed via Cape Horn, reaching Plymouth on the 21st of April 1792. What's interesting is the master, David Blackburn, well, a number of his letters to family and friends have survived. These letters give you a very interesting portrayal of the events of the voyage, the early days of settlement, and include Blackburn's participation in the expedition to Norfolk Islands to establish a settlement there in February 1788. She was sold at auction in 1792 by the Admiralty. Her new owners renamed her Thomas and Nancy. She then carried coal in the Thames area until 1806. In October 1793, the Admiralty, and this shows you how the world has changed, purchased the American mercantile ship, the New Brunswick, named her HMS Supply, and sent her out to Botany Bay to replace her predecessor. Yes, they went and found another ship and renamed her HMS Supply. And yes, that is, of course, they purchased an American ship. It works. Thank you, Runon. Cash, how on earth would these fleets find each other at accidentally came dispersed in the storm tomorrow night? Usually they had destinations and points they had a pre-arranged as meeting up points. Also, the hope was where you didn't get too far apart. But that's why everyone had navigators. You'd also put lamps on, etc., to try and keep people together. So you'd each put so the lead ship, i.e., whichever ship had, well, tend to be both Supply and Sirius, would have a lamp showing at night. So, the Industrial Revolution was fueled by riverine transport of goods in Britain and coastal shipping. I've got no idea how many tons actually by 1900, but still, it was a lot, was all I remember. It's hundreds of thousands of tons. Millions of tons, probably, of stuff actually moving back and forward over a year. Runcash, wouldn't carronades also be useful controlling out-of-control passengers on the penal sword? Yes, but supply doesn't carry any of those. And the silver guns would be very useful for that. Where's what? Sheesh, these dogs are maniacs. Considering one of my dogs currently has the cone of shame on, you're probably not too wrong. I'm not too upset about being out here this evening. Let's put it this way. I'm not too disappointed about being out in my office while everyone else is inside. Normally, I like to have one of the dogs with me, but at the moment we have one dog who's wearing the cone of shame and one dog who's trying to get the cone of shame off the other dog. Andrew Brand, a bit late, but could you talk about some peculiar coastal formations in the Black Sea and Azov Sea? Not in this video, but if you put a comment somewhere or it's suggested on for the patron suggestions, I'm happy to answer it and talk about it if you've got more specifics than just the peculiar coastal formations. Because there are quite a few peculiar coastal formations in a lot of places, and it usually depends on your definition of peculiar. Yeah, one of the things I find interesting sometimes when people are sitting there going, well, there must have been a really advanced ancient civilization that we've forgotten about. Not necessarily. There's the fact you're presuming that technology goes up, and then technology goes up, and we retain all the technology as we go into the next evolutions. But actually, we forget a lot of stuff. We do forget a lot of stuff. You know, there's Roman concrete, which we've only just really figured out recently. And look at how long we've been playing around with concrete. And it's taken us this long to figure out Roman concrete. There's all sorts of things going on that we like to believe we are at the pinnacle and we're based all on the foundation technologies from peoples of the past, but actually some of that foundation is crippled away, so we don't know what they necessarily worked with. And there's some interesting ideas out there. Wasn't there a Korean War task group with HMAS Bataan, USS Bataan, HMAS Canberra, USS Canberra, with aerial recce from land was performed by Canberra bombers? I don't think anyone was quite that confused to do that. Ex-Force, currently losing our oldest ever Husky. He's 18. Started the hole in our pet cemetery this week. That's sad. It's sad. You know. They're a big part of your lives, and when you lose them, that's a very, very big part of your life gone. Now, you might have noticed this ship wasn't mentioned earlier. Well, no, HMS Hyena has one particular job. And it's one duty that is of importance. For starters, she's built, ordered in 1776, laid down in 1777, and launched in 1778. And at that point, well, not long after she's launched and is in use, she is used in 1787 as the escort to help that fleet get out. Basically, the idea was, that's an 11-ship convoy. Yeah, they could be praised to lots of things. Let's give them an escort till they're out of the threat area. So technically what they did was they gave them a 24-gun Porcupine-class post ship. A.k.a. a proper sick freight, not like HMS Sirius. And theoretically, she is the vessel without which it wouldn't have been safe for them to go through European waters. Her escort is essential. And they're accompanied until well after they've left English waters. On the 20th of May, 1787, on their journey, one convict on Scarborough reported a planned mutiny. those allegedly involved were flogged. 2 were transferred to the Prince of Wales. However, in general, the convicts were pretty well behaved on the voyage. In fact, many of the convicts, how do I put this? They were thinking about the amount of money they could probably generate and the amount of money they could earn. Because here is the other thing. You're getting your trip to Australia paid for because you're a convict. You get to go out there. Your skills are going to be in demand. You're going to learn all about the area. And then you're going to be fed while you're out there, because as you're a convict, you're technically the problem of the government. They have to feed you, they have to clothe you, they have to do sorts of things for you. They might try and skip out on it, but they theoretically have to do these things. Now, it's not the best deal, but if you're coming from quite an impoverished background anyway, and you haven't got many chance of advancement in the UK, well, going to a colony where there's going to be a limited number of people and no one's going to be able to talk about anyone's past because everyone's got the same past, that sounds like an advantage. Definitely Excalibur. Actually, the sheer dinkiness of these ships is making the voyage of the other fleet going a long way in yesterday's video seem even more cursed. Froze binoculars looking for torpedo boats. Sounds fun. If I see how much has been forgotten in just 100 years, electronics has been developed. Jesus, I'm just not hopeful for the future. It's horrible, the inefficiency of many improved designs. Yeah. Post ship, as said, is the smallest vessel which can be assigned as a captain as opposed to commander. It's considered a post. So, and that comes from the fact that when you are posted to it, it's announced in the London Gazette. So you've been posted. And if you're a post captain, that's an announced captain. That's an order of seniority above. Okay, so you can be made a captain, but you're still not a post captain because you haven't been posted to a ship. Once you're a captain that's been posted to a ship, you are a post captain. You have a sort of preeminence. And so ships which are listed as post ships matter. Yes, the Ardennes Canal was blown through solid rock. It's basically a subterranean canal sort of, built in the 1820s, and ironically was never used. Lots of casualties though. That's it. And how many times has that proven fatal? Which has proven fatal? You asked that question earlier, and I wasn't quite sure what you were asking about, so I was avoiding it, hoping you would give me more information. Excellent. Yeah, it's like joining the Navy in time. So life might be harsh, and you risk death, but your skills are valuable. You're guaranteed to be fed. You'll get paid and pension, and well, maybe not pension, but you're going to get prize money. Again, it's often difficult for us to comprehend because of our lives versus their lives back then. But if you have a choice, if you have a chance of getting rich, a chance of a new life, you go for it. Now, HMS Hyena, therefore, is the forgotten 12th ship. She turns up. You mean flogging proven fatal or posting? Flogging, it's one of those things that you often hear about, especially in movies, people being flogged to death, etc. But, oh, the constantly forgetting technology, oh, that's been fatal several times. But the flogging, in reality, The captain will give a law, will give a punishment, or the first attempt will give a punishment. They can commute it at any point and go, "You've had enough," and therefore that's just left on the books, and as long as you behave well, it's written off. Or the surgeon can step in at any point and go, "No, stop." Because the surgeon can stop him. Because the whole point of flogging, etc., is to try and discipline and bring a recalcitrant sailor in line, not to kill them. And this is what you have to remember. What one of the key points about Royal Navy punishment is: you do not want to kill sailors. They are trained, skilled personnel who cost money and time to replace. They're kind of like the ships they're on. You do not throw them away for stupid reasons, and you do not kill them yourselves with punishment unless you absolutely have to. It's great having something like keel hauling on the books, because no one wants to do that. Not only does it kill the person, it will actually damage your own hull when you're doing it, and can damage your rudder. So you don't want to do the keel hauling, but it's a great threat to have. I'll kill all your hide if you don't behave. It's a very stupid person who pushes through flogging and all the other options to get the keel hauling. But, again, it's a consensus-led scenario because the crew outnumber the officers and the Marines. So, if the crew and the Marines decide an officer is, like what happened to William Bligh, multiple times in his career, remember he's also deposed as Governor of New South Wales during what is called the Rum Rebellion. Yes, Bligh not only loses the bounty, he also loses Australia in the Rum Rebellion. We'll leave that to one side. So you cannot afford. So these things are, you flogging them, etc. These things are options, but you have a lot of options of gradating that. Now, yes, I read some first-hand account of the construction of the Malabar radio station in the 1900s, 1910s, and it's literally antenna wire erector at cost of X labourers. We are successful. Oof. You see, that wasn't really a viable thing, and it was something interesting to note. One of the discussions which went into this setting up this colony, they were discussing whether to send soldiers or Marines, and they said, well, if you make it a naval colony, it's guaranteed to be healthier than if it's a army colony. And there's a real discussion. Why? And the question goes, the response goes, and this was a discussion in the Royal Society. Naval forces are obsessed with cleanliness because they're always trapped with each other stinking. I am modernising the linguistics a bit, was pretty much the response. Scan around once. Captain Cook was supposed to be one. Again, one of the things you have to remember with the Navy is that there is this, especially when we look back through the prism of the Victorian Navy, which does get very hidebound and very problematic. And it gets that very famous quote from Fisher. At this point, not even Nelson wouldn't get a commission in the Royal Navy. The Navy of this era, of the 18th century and of the early 19th century, is far more a Navy open to promotion. And there are several admirals and officers who go from sailor, from the lowest rank, up to the highest rank in the Royal Navies. Now, appropriately, meet the Lady Penrhyn. Yeah. There is a reason why someone with the sheer amount of Cornish blood that I have in me likes this story quite so much. There are numerous Cornish ladies, fine Cornish ladies and gentlemen, but many fine Cornish ladies on this trip who cause suitable issues. If you want to look up someone fairly cool and fairly interesting, Mary Bryant shows you the exact trouble you can get into if you piss off a Cornish lady. Do not annoy the Cornish ladies. There is a reason why I am very respectful of my family. Lady Penrhyn was originally designed as a 2-deck ship to be used on the Atlantic slave trade, with a theoretical capacity of 275 slaves. So originally, she's a Cornish-named ship, which is for the slave trade. Now, you'll notice on this trip, she is carrying 101... Make sure it's valid. Female convicts. So that's rather a lot less than she could theoretically carry slaves. She was part owned by William Compton, Sever, who served as her ship's master on a voyage to Australia. And the other owner was the Seabiscuit manufacturer and London alderman, William Curtis. For her first voyage, she transported convicts to New South Wales. On her voyage back to Britain afterwards, she was the first European vessel to pass by the Kermadec Islands and the Penrhyn Atoll in the Cook Islands, which is named for her. She also carried a cargo for the British East India Company. The French captured her in the West Indies in 1811 and scuttled her. Now, for her voyage to Australia, as I mentioned, she carried 101 female convicts, 3 officers and 41 other ranks of the New South Wales Marine Corps. Which was sort of, as it sounds like, it's a group of the Royal Marines created to guard the New South Wales colony, as well as her crew. She was part of the convoy of 11 ships. John Turnpenny Attlee was surgeon to convicts, and after Beau Smythe was surgeon to crew. Beau Smythe then took charge of the prisoners on the ship when Attlee fell ill at Tenerife, and well, he proved unequal to the task in Alpha Phillips' opinion, and that is why, in fact, Phillips seems to think that Smythe is the reason why the personnel aboard her that do die. When she reached Port Jackson, she unloads 8 barrels of rice, along with many other supplies at Port Jackson, as well as her personnel. She also carried the first horses brought to Australia, and they consisted of 1 stallion, 1 colt, 3 mares, and 2 fillies, all taken aboard in Cape Town. So yes, the original 7 horses. Oh, good lord! I'm just thinking. Think about that from a breeding population perspective of horses and having enough horses. You can understand why horses become a very big part of the Australian mythology early on, because they're always short of them. Flogging also seems to occur less times than what is portrayed. I saw the stats, and it's one which is avoided unless things have gotten bad aboard ship, or unless someone's been really, really problematic. I once read the comparison between naval punishments and those used the English legal system in the 18th century, and basically you're well off at sea and navy. Is the gene pool healthy enough after, say, 20 generations? I mean, this is massive inbreeding, no? Yeah, they have to bring in a lot of other horses. What have you stumbled upon here, Jellicoe? The founding of Australia, which you will be... Is it Australia, New Zealand he ends up being in charge of? I think it's New Zealand, but it could be Australia. He's Governor General of New Zealand. Yeah, sorry, it's the country slightly to your north that we're talking about the founding of today, not the one you end up being governor of. But you know, Admiral Jellicoe, don't worry, we might get well onto the story of that at some point. Vision. I read that Vice Admiral William Bligh, as Governor of New South Wales, was supported by the small landers and overthrown by the corrupt wealthy elite, the officers of New South Wales cause. You're not far wrong. He does seem to manage to annoy a lot of people. But, broadly speaking, he'd been better served trying to take those people with him than trying to fight those people. It's one of the jobs he's sent to do after he's been First Sea Lord. Go and become the Governor of New Zealand. And don't hold it against the ship, Dan. It is a ceremonial posting, but it's an important one as well. And then we have Scarborough. Now, Scarborough... She's a double-decked, three-masted, ship-rigged, copper-sheaved bark. Think about that. Think about how much money it costs to build her. A double-decked, three-masted, ship-rigged, copper-sheaved bark. Now, she would be assigned to the colonisation of Australia, the First Fleet. Then she'd be chartered by the British East India Company to take a cargo of tea back to Britain after her 2 voyages transporting convicts. She did 2 voyages transporting convicts. She spent a lot of her time as a West Indiaman, training between London and West Indies, but did perform a 3rd voyage in 1801 to Bengal for the East India Company. In January 1805, she repelled a French privateer of superior force in a single ship action, and then in April 1805 she foundered. Now, it's quite a fun action, and I'm going to concentrate on that. December 1804, under a Captain James Scott, she left the Motherbank in a convoy for West Indies. She joined with HMS Swift and 10 other vessels, but a gale dispersed the vessel on 5th of January. And then Scarborough joined Dorset and King George, and the 3 agreed to keep company to Barbados. On 26th of January, they encountered a French privateer of 16 guns and nearly 200 men. In order to be able to resist, Scott asked for reinforcements from his 2 companions. The captains agreed, and 7 men came over from Dorset and 5 from King George, giving Scott 27 men and boys in total, including a passenger who belonged to the 60th Regiment of the British Army. At 4 p.m, an engagement ensued which lasted an hour. Scarborough succeeded in repelling the privateer, but at the cost of 1 man killed and her first officer mortally wounded. The privateer is presumed to have suffered up to 70 casualties, and the 3 British ships did actually reach Barbados the next day. On convicts out, tea back. How very British. Incredibly. She took... When she left Portsmouth on 30th May in a part of the first voyage, she carried 208 male convicts, together with officers and 34 other ranks of the New South Wales Marine Corps. Two of the ringleaders of a suspected mutiny were transferred to HMS Sirius. There they received 24 lashes each, and then they were transferred to HMS Prince of Wales for the rest of the voyage. It was decided to keep them away from the warship, which had a load of guns and explosives on it. Ah, does carry. Now, when she left Port Jackson on the 6th of May 1788, after offloading everything, in the company with Charlotte, she travelled to China. They landed at Lord Howe Islands for birds and vegetables, then sailed on to Whampoa, en route becoming the first European vessels to pass among the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. They made landfall on Tinian in the northern Marianas, where they were forced to anchor and to replenish themselves. The voyage having depleted Scarborough's stores and scurvy becoming rampant amongst their crew. 15 of the sickest men were brought ashore on Tinian and housed in tents on the dunes, while the remainder of the crew foraged for food. While anchored off Tinian, both vessels were nearly blown onto shore by strong winds, but it was averted, disaster, that is, when their captains decided to cut the anchor ropes and raise sail to move offshore. They recovered on Tinian for several weeks, and when Scarborough's crew had returned to sufficient health for the voyage to resume, they carried on. In an evening sailing weather, they reached Macau on 9th of September and Whampoa shortly afterwards. There, when they were there, the East India Company chartered them as extra ships for their convoy back to England. And there was actually a sensible reason for this. If you go to China, you join the East India Company's convoys. A, you're going to get chartered by them, which means your own money. And B, you'll be under their protection, because the East India Company will have a warship with them. They will also have the East Indiamen, which will be armed. So it's very sensible. If you're going to do a long voyage back, you've been voyaged all this way with Sirius as your escort. Okay, she's not much, but she's a warship. Well, hang on, now you've got to do the voyage all the way back. Sugar. How are we going to do that? Well, let's go find the nearest likely convoy of armed ships who are on our flag. East India Company, up north, sail there. Departing Whampoa on the 17th of December, the ships reached St. Helena by the 20th of March 1789 and arrived in England on the 15th of June. She then does a second voyage with the second fleet, and she takes out. Under that time, I think there was actually a mutiny. Well, there was an attempt at a mutiny. It failed, and she again comes back via China, again joining an East India Company convoy. Admiral Bligh seems too dictatorial in his command style. Very intelligent and well-meaning, but relations with subordinates suffered. Yeah. Definitely not good at leadership. Not good. And here is Borrowdale. So, please note on the ships we had... for the ships which have their own, that I could find pictures of them themselves, I put in their pictures. We'll talk about the others in a bit. But, so we had Lady Penrhyn and Scarborough as two examples of transports. And Borrowdale is an example of the store ships, and the only one of them which actually had a picture. Now, Borrowdale was built in Sunderland in 1785, and she's a collier. Okay? She's a coal ship. She's one of 3 colliers, which are others being Golden Grove and Fishburne, which, if that sounds very similar, those names are exactly what those are. The other 2 ships which are used as store ships for this trip. Owned by George and William Layton, that the British government contracted to carry stores of provisions to Australia. So they basically asked, look, where are some sturdy ships? Coal ships. They're sturdy. They'll be perfect store ships for us. And so that's what they chartered. They chartered coal ships. Who had also used a coal ship? Oh, Endeavour. Cook's Endeavour was a coal ship. I can't think what's going on here. Someone's thinking, isn't they? Aren't they? Now, she'd appeared on Lloyd's Register in 1786. So that's when we sort of roughly date her to. But we don't know. She left Portsmouth on the 13th of May 1787 and arrived at Botany Bay, Sydney, Sydney, Australia, on the 20th of January 1788, and then sailed to Port Jackson and arrived there on the 26th of January 1788, where they actually decided to found a colony. She returned she left Port Jackson on the 14th of July 1788. So you notice there's months for them to actually get all the stocks off, get things ready, restock the ships, sort things out. Then they start heading off places. She decided to return to England via Cape Horn. She wasn't actually really probably good enough to go and join an East India convoy. She couldn't sail fast enough, and they might not have a use for her, so she has to take it on her own. When they reach Cape Horn, the crew are so badly affected by scurvy that the master took her to Rio de Janeiro, where the harbour master and his men had to bring the ship into its berth. The crew was so ill, they had to signal and get the harbour master of Rio de Janeiro harbour to come out, and he came out with a crew, got into the ship, and berthed the ship. Think about how bad a crew has to be to expose themselves in that sort of scenario. There's pride factor, but there's also the factor of someone else could try and sneak aboard the ship pretending they're that and be pirates on you and try and take your ship. They then spent a few weeks in Rio de Janeiro, but still 5 of the crew died on the homeward voyage. And one of the 5 was actually the captain's father, Joseph Reed, a former master mariner of the coastal trade himself. Borrowdale arrived at Plymouth from Botany Bay on 25th of March 1789. Hello Nathan, how are you doing? Bligh was good when there were people around to moderate him. When he was in solo charge, he grew very paranoid and very favouritist. But he also had excellent skills as a navigator, etc., which the Royal Navy didn't want to get rid of. But it's very difficult to detach the skills from the personality. And that's the problem. It's very difficult to detach the skills from the personality. So the other ships were Alexander, Charlotte, Friendship, Prince of Wales, Golden Grove, and Fishbone. Now, you've heard about the other two, last two, because they're sisters of Borrowdale. The Alexander, well, she was loaded with her convicts at Woolwich Docks. They came from Prison Hulks on the Thames and directly from Newgate Prison. She then sailed to Portsmouth alongside Lady Penrhyn to meet the remainder of the fleet. Before she'd even left Portsmouth, a fever had broken out on board that killed 16 men. She left Portsmouth on the 13th of May 1787 carrying 195 male convicts. 15 more would die on the journey, most of any ship in the fleet. The cause of the fever was suggested to be, and quite probably was, inadequate management of the bilge. This was reported by John White, the surgeon aboard HMS Sirius, when he went and did an inspection, and reported this back to Philip in June 1787. The others complained of was wholly occasioned by the bilge water, which had by some means or other risen so great a height that the panels of the cabin and buttons of the clothes of the officers were turned nearly black by noxious effluvia. When the hatches were taken off, the stench was so powerful it was scarcely possible to stand over them. The surgeons aboard the ship, and most importantly, John White, complaining to Arthur Phillip, meant Arthur Phillip had a conversation with Alexander's commander, Sinclair, and the discussion was sort of along lines of, you will pump the bilges, you will air the bilges, you will sort out the bilges, or I will send someone over who will take command and who will do it. So he did it. There was supposedly an attempted mutiny aboard the vessel in October 1787, where a band of 5 convicts and some of the able seamen armed themselves with iron bars, intending to overpower the guard and sail the vessel to the nearest landfall. Sinclair was aware of this, though, because of an informant, had the crew and convicts locked below decks, while the conspirators were identified. Philip Farrell and Thomas Griffiths were transferred to Sirius, where they were flogged, and then sent aboard Prince of Wales for the remainder of the voyage to New South Wales. Sinclair also had to transfer his informant to the Scarborough for the informant's own protection. Now, one of the interesting things is once they get to Port Jackson, well, they've taken a judge advocate with them. And one of the convicts, Henry Cable, sues Duncan Sinclair, the master of Alexander, for the loss of his possessions during the voyage. And in the first civil court case in Australia, Cable won the restitution of £15. Vision. Admiral Bligh was a bit like Captain Edward Jellicoe of the Enterprise D-Frame. He's an Admiral now in Star Trek Prodigy. I'm still not sure how he made Admiral. Oh, good lord. He gives such a bad name to name Jellicoe. Now, when she leaves Port Jackson on the 14th of July 1788, she's in company with Friendship, a crew of which she picked up when that ship was scuttled at Batvia on the way to Canton. And, well, she seems to have been heading to Canton herself to pick up again an East India supply convoy. She arrived back on the Thames on the 1st of June 1789. She carried with her to England... Excuse me a second. Bless you. No one needs to see me sneeze. She carried with her to England the papers of the French navigator La Perouse. And Lloyd's Register for 1789 shows Alexander's master still as Sinclair, and her trade is the London to Botany Bay route. A later amendment to the entry gives a new master, new trade, neither of which is legible. The burthen did also the amendment also did correct the berth from 650 to 445 tons, suggesting that frankly he'd had her overloaded for the first journey. Which might well have been the reason for the troubled bilges. Now, not that note of supplies, and not that note, not that one. This is the trouble with having my notes up and having not done a read through of this before. It's sort of today. It can make you very, very slow. Right then. The Charlotte. Now, I've already heard a bit about her. She was a merchant ship, like many others. She seems to have spent most of her career being trading in the Baltic and the West Indies, apart from voyage transporting convicts. She was a heavy sailor. In fact, she was towed down the English Channel to keep pace with the rest of the fleet. Her master, Thomas Gilbert, and her surgeon, John White, were principals. Her master was Thomas Gilbert, and her surgeon, John White, would go on to become principal surgeon to the colony. When Charlotte had been 2 days at sea, it was discovered that her third mate had been left behind at Plymouth. How you can go 2 days at sea and not realise that one of your officers on your crew has been left behind, I am not sure, but they did manage it. He was replaced by a suitably experienced seaman dragooned from Hyena. Yes, one of the chiefs from Hyena was called up and gone, yeah, you're going aboard as a master's mate. Really? Yes. That's probably Hyena's individual biggest sacrifice for this mission. Batavia, the second A isn't silent. Batavia? Honestly, it was not spelt that way when I was reading the notes, so maybe my notes I copied wrong. Fushi, that's just very fun. I'm just how confident you have to be to let that happen. I haven't even... Let's put it this way. You've been waiting for us to get to the ship in the convoy, which caused endless trouble. Meet Charlotte. Now, she sailed for Botany Bay carrying 84 male and 24 female convicts, or 88 male and 20 female. They weren't quite sure when they started off. They might have had 24. They might have had 24 female. They might have had 88 male. They weren't 100% sure. They knew they had roughly 108 convicts aboard. Okay? Among the prisoners are such names as James Squire, James Bloodsworth, James Underworth, Samuel Lightfoot, and William and Mary Bryant. Yes. The Bryants are aboard. Charlotte arrived at Port Jackson after having had such an interesting voyage that White commissioned Thomas Barrett to create the Charlotte Medal. Yes, the surgeon paid one of the convicts to create a medal for everyone who'd been aboard that survived the Charlotte voyage. Just think about that. Just think about the journey. Think about what Charlotte was like. That the surgeon gets a medal commissioned for everyone who's been aboard. Not the captain, the surgeon. She left Port Jackson on the 6th of May 1788. She went to China to get a cargo of tea, where she's chartered by the East India Company. In the company of Scarborough. I've already discussed her trip and what happens. She has a fairly nice trip. And then she is, well, she goes back home, she gets used on the London Jamaica trade, and then Lord knows how this happens. But the Royal Navy takes her up from trade again in 1806. Sorry, gents, we have a few more ships to go through, including Friendship. When they use her as part of the transport vessels for the expedition under General Sir David Baird and Admiral Sir Homeriggs Popham that would capture the Dutch Cape Colony. She was found to be useful, and she got there. Fushi, I am loving the comments, but yeah, Poop deck, no. And oh, that one's easy. Yeah, if the USS Galena was instead named USS Woodchuck, how much wood would the Woodchuck chuck if the Woodchuck could and would chuck wood? Probably a lot. Darren, I may get something similar made up for us. Naval History 23. Yeah, I think you need to talk. I think, Dan, you might want to talk to Bijon about that, because considering some of the ideas you've had, as we all know, Bijon did a very, very nice this lovely thing for our Buffalo visit, and we might want to have a look into these. Just saying, while we're here. Discary, what did a woman have to do to be considered a convict and shipped to Australia? Either be married to someone who was convicted, or be quite naughty themselves and be part of the there are various reasons they came up with, including being, and one of the popular ones, and one of the later ones was really focused on this, was of course, I'm trying to think of a way of saying this without triggering YouTube's various policies, were women of negotiable company. i.e. you can negotiate for their company. Let's see. Let's see what YouTube manages to find objectionable about that. Then we have the friendship. Okay, so she originally starts off on the Antigua trade, then is involved in the East Country coal trade, then is sent to St. Petersburg in July 1786 for iron, hemp, and planks. And then she's chartered when she gets back to the UK from that trip. She was the smallest of the convict transports. Her master was Francis Walton, and the surgeon assigned to her was Thomas Arndell. If you notice, there's a lot of surgeons being assigned to this trip. Again, there's a reason. They want to keep the colony healthy. She was carrying 76 male and 21 female convicts. Theoretically. Again, rather like with Charlotte, we're not quite sure. It seems that some of the people weren't always sleeping in the places where they were supposed to be sleeping. Now, some 10 or 12 of the female convicts aboard her proved, in the phraseology of the time, particularly unruly and promiscuous. So, at the Cape of Good Hope, Walton was ordered, instructed, and had sort of begged to transfer all the women to the other transports to make room for livestock purchased there for the colony. So basically, they exchanged the ladies to another ship and took on a load of cows. She was the last ship to come to anchor at Sydney, in the mouth of Sydney Cove, on 8 p.m. on 26th of January 1788. Two of her female convicts had died on the voyage. One before their arrival in Rio, and one after transfer to Lady Penrhyn. Now, at Greenwich, you can find a silver medallion that features an image of friendship and the inscription "Success to the Friendship 1787" on the reverse. The inscription FW are the initials of Francis Walton, the Master of Friendship. It's theorised that Walton had purchased this and had it engraved before the fleet sailed. Downstream, I'm in touch. Yeah, he is. Downstream, this is a problem, Bichon, that all of us have in this particular group. We have lots of ideas. We do not have artistic skills. Yeah, Ackmore Park is where you find negotiable companionship. Right. Then we have the Prince of Wales. Ah, yes. So she was... Well... She's originally launched in Sidmouth, rebuilt in 1786 at Rothermere. Rotherhithe, I mean. And launched in 1779. Now, in 1787, how do I put this politely? She's either a bark, but occasionally she's used as a privateer, carrying between 26 and 9-pounder guns. At various points, she has an interesting career. Let's just say the Prince of Wales has a very interesting career. And even at one point, well, let's see. She does the voyage to Australia. She gets her crew incapacitated by scurvy on the way home. She's then deployed as a whaler in the South Seas fishery. She's then used as a privateer under a letter of marque, before performing a voyage as a slave ship. Then she has a period nicely referred to as under French command, where before she's returned to Britain and used to carry trade goods between London, the West Indies and the Mediterranean. She last recorded existing as 1810. Now, we're not quite sure about her origins or where she's built, but her initial owner is listed as the Cornhill merchant John Mather, who previously purchased and disposed of Captain's Cook Endeavour after that vessel returned from Botany Bay. Lloyd's Register entry from 1787 also recorded that Mather owned a vessel named Hannibal, which had been renamed from Prince of Wales. Now, she was selected by the shipbroker William Richards on behalf of the Admiralty for the first voyage fleet, after he consulted with Royal Marine officers Watkin Tench and David Collins. Both officers were going to sail the fleet to Australia, Tench as Captain of Marines and Collins Judge Advocate for the colony. She was the second smallest of the ships and the last to be contracted to join the voyage. Now, she was also the last transport to be added to the fleet before it sailed. She left Portsmouth on the 30th of May 1787 with a crew of around 25. She was in company with the other vessels of the fleet. 5 transports, 3 store ships, 2 Royal Navy vessels. And that's 10. Yeah. I said 11 ships earlier. There's 10 ships. Let me just check my list again. I might have added on. There's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. Yeah. I know. There's 6 transport ships, 3 supply ships, 2 escort ships. Yes, that's 11. So, yeah. My own notes are wrong here. Where did I get these notes? Oh no, they picked up another one, didn't they? They picked up another ship. Yeah. Now, she had all sorts of issues on her way. When she eventually gets to Port Jackson, she lands 49 convicts, 31 Marines, and 23 civilians. She carried 49 female convicts on her departure from Portsmouth. After 5 days at sea, 2 gentlemen were also brought across from Scarborough, far serious, ringleaders of a failed mutiny. They would remain aboard Prince of Wales for the remainder of the voyage to Australia. So think about that. Their punishment for mutinying was to end up on a ship where they were 2 male convicts, 49 female convicts, and, well, the crew and the Marines and the civilians. But there were no females aboard the ship they just left. Not really. I can see why they don't mutiny again, but I can also not see it as really a disincentive for mutinying in the first place compared to the rest of the ships. There were only 9 cases of illness aboard Prince of Wales by the time she reached Tenerife, the least for any of the first fleet transports. And, in fact, this caused Philip to write to the Admiralty, advising the convicts are not so sickly as when we sailed. Though the women aboard the Prince of Wales had no new clothing and were still in the regular apparel they had worn in prison, which distressed and annoyed him. He felt he should have been sent better clothing for them. And one of the things about Philip is he is very much a proper sort in terms of you are supposed to take care of those people under your command. There was no ship surgeon aboard the Prince of Wales. However, John White periodically came aboard from Sirius when weather and sailing conditions permitted. Got rowed over. And as the fleet headed towards Rio in July, humid conditions and heavy rains generated a plague of bugs below deck, with more than 100 insects found in one small sleeping area. There are also reports of rats, fleas and lice, and an outbreak of scurvy in late December. Despite this, illness remained rare, and the first convict death was from accidental causes rather than diseases. On 20th of July, the ship's longboat fell from a boom and struck 22-year-old Jane Bonner on the head. She, unsurprisingly considering the care available at the time, died from her injuries 6 days later. Second convict, one of the gentlemen, John Hartley, died of unknown causes on the 5th of August. To be fair, though, two deaths compare quite favourably with the other ship transports, especially Alexander, which recorded 30 deaths, which is attributed, as mentioned, to the bilge and to her overcrowding and to the general treatment of her captain. Now, there is one note made by Philip which really did distress him. Generally, he felt that convict discipline was well maintained, except for prostitution between the female convicts and the crew, which was apparently rampant on the Prince of Wales, Friendship and Lady Penrhyn. And there was punishment for both the crew and for the convicts. Including at one point on the Prince of Wales, one lady was punished for, 6 lashes for a woman caught stealing from her fellows while they were at prayer. Terrible. The Australian Navy did not participate in the Emu Wars. They decided they would like to be friends with their emu overlords rather than try and make them enemies. This might explain why the Australian Navy does quite so well funding at the moment, because the emus are on their side, not on the armies or the air forces. The air forces they just don't like because, being flightless birds, they feel that the air force is kind of rubbing it in. So they like the Navy. There were some issues with the bringing of wives, etc., with them. If we consider this amongst the Marines, 16 of the Marines embarked with their wives, and there were 6 children. Discipline was poor amongst the wives and children, it was found. And in June 1787, 2 Marines were court-martialed for disobeying orders. One received 300 lashes. Later in the voyage, 2 sergeants refused to share a mess after one insulted the other's wife. One drunken Marine sergeant fell through an open hatchway and injured the pregnant wife of another Marine, for which offence he was placed in leg cuffs for 2 weeks and then transferred to the Alexander, which is basically really a fate worse than death. And then in late October, Lieutenant James Maxwell, who had transferred from the Charlotte, was found incoherently drunk on duty and promptly returned to the Charlotte. This was, of course, aboard the Prince of Wales. Two more children were born of the wives of Marines during the voyage, and the wife of Marine drummer Benjamin Cook actually died from unspecified illness and was buried at sea in October 1787. You can actually find one of the Sergeants, wrote an account of the voyage in his journal, which is now held in New State Library of New South Wales, which was written by James Scott. So, please note that the Prince of Wales, after he returns to England, becomes a whaler, privateer, all sorts of fun things. She has an interesting life. And then we have key personalities. Dan clean clothing also helps get rid of lice, ticks, and so improves health on board. Yes. It's a critical thing, and it's something which Philip considered unconscionable. He was able to acquire clean clothing for the sailors and for the convicts. He was able to acquire it, and then he was busy trying to find appropriate clothing for the women. And yes, he could provision them with male clothing, which was basically what he sort of ends up doing. But he found it absolutely... It's one of those things, and one of those levels of organisation you find that there are Royal Navy officers complaining about the level of logistical organisation because they're used to a certain standard of logistics and preparation. And you find notes from the Admiralty basically looking at it going, we gave the civilians... X, Y, Z jobs to do. We did everything else and they didn't do this. Okay, we'll take that over. We'll take that over. We'll take that over. And it's one of the things that is interesting is the second voyage has more issues from the convicts actually mutinying, etc. But one of the reasons given is because they're mutinying because they're healthier. And they're healthier because a lot of their supplies and issues have been taken over by the Navy because they have found the civilians didn't do it well for the first convoy. I don't know. There's some interesting officers and some very skilled people, and these of course are the two who, well, yeah, we should sort of talk about first because they really are they're the first and second governor. They are the people who in many ways set the standards, and I would say one of the reasons why Bligh ends up in the trouble he does is because these men establish a standard of what I would call naval-style consensus leadership, or objective-based leadership, where you give your understudies an objective, and you tell them to go do it, and you don't mind how they do it as long as they do it. But you also hold them to certain standards. And it's one of the interesting things is that corruption comes really not really under the first two governors. There is a level of corruption going on, but they are both quite able to keep it under control without causing problems. They just would look at people and go, really? Really? You think that's a smart idea? Or, I don't think that's quite right, do you? And you decide it wasn't quite right. Cardboard Chemical, thoughts on the Grumman S2F tracker? Not really something to discuss at this point in the story of the First Fleet and the founding of Australia, but broadly speaking, a very useful aircraft for the time it was in. The Australians also fought and lost to rabbits. Basically, the Australians seem to be very good at fighting other humans, not very good at fighting other animals. I'm not sure what the problem is. Perhaps they're just too attached to cuddly, fluffy life. Arthur Phillip was born on the 11th of October 1738 in Bread Street, London. He was the son of Jacob Phillip, an immigrant from Frankfurt, who could have been a language teacher, a merchant vessel owner, captain, or a common sailor. His mother, Elizabeth Breach, was a widow of a common sailor by the name of John Herbert, who had died of disease in Jamaica aboard HMS Tartar, 13th August 1732. At the time of Arthur's birth, his family maintained a modest existence, that's what they're describing as tenants near Cheapside in the City of London. That's really not... That's a nice phrase of saying they were lower middle class and quite poor, and one bad sneeze and they were going to drop down into the lowest slums quite quickly. There are no surviving records of his early childhood. His father, Jacob, died in 1739. That's not good for your income. Okay? That is not good. And it's unsurprising he went to sea with the Royal Navy from the age of 9. Because the fact he's made 9 shows how hard working and how much effort his mum has put into keeping that family together. In 1751, when he is 13 years old, he is accepted into Greenwich Hospital School. Now, this school is set up for the sons of indigent seafarers, but basically, it's a case of he's been to sea on board a vessel at the age of 9. He's impressed the captain, and the captain has managed to get him a place at the school where he will be taught literacy, arithmetic, navigational skills, and cartography. The headmaster, a Reverend Francis Swindon, observed that Philip was an unassuming, reasonable, businesslike to the smallest degree in everything he undertakes. He remained at Greenwich Hospital for 2.5 years, which was longer than the average student stay of a year, and at the end of 1753 he's granted a 7-year indenture as an apprentice aboard Fortune, a 210-ton whaling vessel commanded by merchant mariner William Redhead. He spent the next few months aboard Fortune after leaving Greenwich Hospital School, awaiting the 1754 whaling season. Now, portraits depict him as being shorter than average, with an olive complexion and dark eyes, a long nose, and well-pronounced lower lip. Which does kind of fit with that. Now, he then goes off and serves in merchant fleet expeditions in the Barents Sea, but in 1755 he enlists in the Royal Navy as a captain's servant aboard the 68-gun HMS Buckingham, commanded by his mother's cousin, Captain Michael Everett. Okay. Now, when you enlist as a captain's servant, that's one of the positions which the captains used to use out when they had reached their maximum establishment of midshipmen, and they wanted to enlist others so they could get some training to become midshipmen. That's what he'd be enlisted as. Now, by this point, in 1755, well, if we think about it, he is 17 years old. He served in home waters until 1756, then joined Admiral John Byng's Mediterranean Fleet. Buckingham was Rear Admiral Temple West flagship at the Battle of Majorca. Then when Everett went to command the 90-gun, second-rate HMS Union, Philip went with him and took part in the raid on St. Malo. And then Philip again transferred with Everett to the 64-gun HMS Stirling Castle, which went to the West Indies to serve at the Siege of Havana. And in June 1761, Philip was, surprisingly enough, considering this whole time he's been technically a captain's servant, was commissioned as a lieutenant in recognition for his active service. He then retired on half pay because peace comes in 1763. Now, That was his time in the 7 Years' War. He then marries Margaret Charlotte Denison, a widow, 16 years his senior in 1763, and moves to Grass Eyes in Linders, Hampshire, establishing a farm there. It seems to be not a happy marriage, and in 1769 Philip returns to the Navy. Following year, he's posted as second lieutenant on board HMS Egmont, a newly built 74-gun ship of the line. In 1774, he's seconded to the Portuguese Navy as a captain, serving in their war against Spain. With the Portuguese Navy, he commanded a 26-gun frigate, the Nosso Senhor de Pilar, and on that ship he managed to take a detachment of troops from Rio de Janeiro to Colonia de Sacramento on the Rio de la Plata to relieve the garrison there. The voyage also conveyed a consignment of convicts assigned to carry out work at the Colonia. During a storm encountered on the course of the voyage, the convicts assisted in working the ship, and on arriving at Colonia, Philip recommended that they be rewarded for saving the ship by remission of the sentences. A version of this actually found its way into the English press in 1786, when Philip was appointed to lead the expedition to Sydney, and is basically one of the reasons why it really helps establish him in the press as someone who is good at, for these situations. Although the press, you have to remember that period, are not as powerful as they are today. Philip actually also, while he was with the Spanish Navy, played a leading role in capture of the Spanish ship, the San Agustin, and the Portuguese Navy actually then commissioned her as the Santo Agostino under Philip's command. This was in 1777. Now, in 1778, when Britain was again at war, Philip is of course recalled to the Royal Navy Service, and is appointed to First Lieutenant on a 74-gun HMS Alexander as part of the Channel Fleet. He's promoted to Commander on the 2nd of September 1779 and given command of the 8-gun fireship HMS Basilic. When Spain entered the conflict, Philip was invited to a series of private meetings with the Earl of Sandwich, who was the First Lord of the Admiralty, sharing his charts and knowledge of the South American coastlines. Philip was then promoted to post captain in the 30th of November 1781, given command of the 20-gun vessel HMS Ariadne, and she was sent out to the Elbe to escort a transport ship carrying a detachment of Hanoverian troops, which would arrive at the port of Cuxhaven on 28th of December. The estuary on their way froze over, trapping Ariadne in the harbour. In March 1782, he managed to bring the Hanoverian troops to England. Then he takes on his first person he would sponsor up the ranks himself. And interesting enough, this new lieutenant was called Philip Gridley King, who would be his new first lieutenant. Philip Gridley King would go on to become the third governor. So, first governor, second governor, a lieutenant he's trained up is the third governor of New South Wales. You're starting to notice that New South Wales becomes sort of used to a certain style of leadership, which has come up through the same sort of school. The largest vessel he gets to command, well, let's put it this way. He gets a few different operations, and Philip keeps being used as an advisor by various secretaries of state and lords of the Admiralty, because he really does know his navigation in South America. And on 27 December 1782, Philip took charge of the 64-gun HMS Europa, and joined with an expedition under the command of Commodore Robert Kingsmill, which included the 70-gun HMS Grafton, the 74-gun HMS Elizabeth, the Europa, of course, and the 32-gun frigate HMS Impaniga. Unfortunately, after the ships departed, an armistice was concluded between Great Britain and Spain. sadly enough, so when they put in for storm repairs at Rio de Janeiro, they found the war had ended, robbing Philip of the chance of naval glory in South America. But then he goes off and does some surveying work, and then he gets the colonial service. So again, they've picked a fairly decent officer. The Viceroy of Brazil in 1778 writes, "Philip is an officer of education and principle. He gives way to reason and does not, before doing so, fall into exaggerated and unbearable excesses of temper. He is very clean-handed, is an officer of great truth and very brave, no flatterer, saying what he thinks but without temper or want of respect." He's a useful gentleman. Hal Richards. Now, when Philip had been appointed as governor designated of the colony and began to plan the expedition, he had requested that the convicts that were being sent be trained. Unfortunately, only 12 carpenters and a very few men who knew anything about agriculture were actually sent. Some with technical and building skills were commandeered immediately, and the colony's isolation meant that it took almost 2 years for Philip to receive replies to his dispatches from his superiors in London. So, with him establishing a civil administration with courts of law and all the other things, he is having to do all this a long way from home. So they have entrusted this man to basically be the British government and found a colony. And if it fails, all that £84,000, all that hope for a place to help balance French interest in the Far East will disappear. Now, this is what leads to some of the interesting things, because Philip established a civil administration. When Henry and Susanna Cable, remember, the people who sued Duncan Sinclair, the Captain Alexander, for stealing their possessions during the voyage, Sinclair boasted that as convicts they had no protection from the law, as was the case in Britain, and so he could not be sued. The court found for the plaintiffs and ordered the captain to make restitution for the theft or have his ship impounded. This was because of the laws that Philip had set up. He'd drawn up a detailed memorandum of his plans for the proposed new colony. And this included, the laws of this country, England, will of course be introduced in New South Wales, and there is one that I would wish to take place from the moment His Majesty's forces take possession of the country. That there can be no slavery in a free land, and consequently no slaves. Whilst he did have quite a strong disciplinarian technique in that he would issue floggings and hangings, he commuted death sentences as a rule, and let's put it this way, the floggings and hangings were no more common than they were in the UK when dealing with similar levels of with sort of prisons and those sort of things going on. The captain had stolen some of their items. It was felt. He also ensured that the settlement supplies were rationed equally to convicts, officers and marines, with females being given 2/3 of the weekly males' rations. And this caused trouble with some of the New South Wales Marines. But again, he managed to keep this problem under control. Basically, if let's put it this way, Philip might have been small, but he was very capable of keeping how do I put this politely? So let's put it this way: if you were an officer, you could probably organise a mutiny against Bligh, because the sailors and the sailors would come with you, and the soldiers would come with you. But if you tried to organise a mutiny against Philip or Hunter, you probably find quickly that your soldiers, sailors, and the convicts, who you were hoping to lead a mutiny, would go, if we have to pick between you and him, we will pick him. Because he does it, but he does it when he has to. Not any more and not any less. Now, for example, when I talk about the fact his commuting prison sentences, in late February, 6 convicts were brought before the court for stealing supplies. They were all sentenced to death. Thomas Barrett, the ringleader, was hanged that day. Philip gave the rest a reprieve. They were banished to another island in the harbour and given only bread and water instead. He had John Hunter and William Bradley, the two officers from the Sirius, conduct a thorough survey of the harbour at Sydney Cove, and himself joined them on an expedition to survey Botany Bay. Because, well, he felt it was necessary to expand the settlement's knowledge of the landscape. When Sirius was sent out, her return to Cape Town under Commander Hunter because of various scurvy and other issues. The voyage, which completed a circumnavigation around the world, returned to Sydney Cove in April, just in time to save the near-starving colony. Now, one of the things that interested me is that Philip had brought a servant, Henry Edward Dodd, with him from his time as a farmer. And he appoints him as farm superintendent at Farm Cove. And that is where the first crops were successfully cultivated. Later moving it to Rose Hill, where the soil was better. James Roos, a convict, was later appointed to the position after Dodd died in 1791. Roos, succeeding in the farming endeavours, was the first person to receive the colony land grant. In June 1790, well, when more convicts arrived at the Second Fleet, unfortunately, HMS Guardian, which was carrying more supplies, was disabled en route after hitting an iceberg, which left the colony low on provisions again. Supply, the only ship left under colonial command, as Sirius had been wrecked on the 19th of March 1790, was sent to Batavia. Now, this one is actually spelt correctly, so you are right. Batavia for supplies. In late 1792, Philip, whose own health at this point was suffering, relinquished the governorship temporarily to Major Francis Gross, Lieutenant Governor, and then Commander of New South Wales Corps, and left for Britain on the Atlantic, which had arrived with the convicts of the Third Fleet. He was unfortunately unable to carry out his original intention of returning to Port Jackson once his health was restored, as medical advice compelled him to resign formally on 23rd of July 1793. Now, Philip is also interestingly because he had very specific orders about the Aboriginal people. And his orders with regard to Aborigines had been to conciliate their affections, live in amity and kindness with them, and to punish anyone who would wantonly destroy them or give them any unnecessary interruption in the exercise of their several occupations. And anyone found harming or killing Aboriginal people without provocation will be severely punished. unfortunately, his strategy of dancing and trying to make friends with them didn't allow him to succeed with what he actually wanted to do. What he wanted to do was to get a family of the local Eora tribe to come and live with them. That didn't work, and then there was sort of, despite the friendliness, there were getting issues and tensions. So he knows that there are Eora warriors wandering around, and so he goes out to try and capture someone. They capture a gentleman called Aranabano, who Philip and his officers start to learn the language and customs from, but he dies of smallpox in 1789, and this ravages the rest of the Eora population. It's the old advantage of Europeans. Wherever they go, they take smallpox with them, and it ravages local populations. Now, this carries on, and please note, it carries on, so one of them dies, and then they capture two more, and one they escape, but one of them sort of they make friends with, and then they go to another event, and Philip is surrounded by people and stabbed in the shoulder. He orders his troops not to fire back, and not to fight over it, realizing they haven't killed him, they're just stabbed in the shoulder, and thinking it's probably punishment for the kidnappings. But actually, what's sort of interesting is, after this whole saga has gone over, then one of those who had escaped returns with his family to live in Sydney, and they actually start to make friendly relations. So it's kind of a weird scenario. He tried out trying to be friendly, that hadn't worked. Then he went to kidnapping, which is not really a good response, but and that sort of, by a roundabout way, does lead to it working by the re-establishment of friendly relations after they've been he's been stabbed. So, yeah. One interesting thing is when he returns to Britain in 1792, one of those men who he had captured, and the one who he got stabbed because of, Benelong, and another Aboriginal man named Yemenwanwara, travel with him on the Atlantic back to the UK to look after him. They have formed such a close friendship with Philip, they travel with him to take care of him. One of them is one of the ones he's kidnapped and sort of imprisoned to try and learn language of. Very forgiving and nice people. Anyway, his first wife, when he gets home, he finds has died. He marries Isabella Whitehead of Bath, and when his health recovers, instead of being sent back to Australia, he goes back to serve in the Royal Navy. And he'll eventually get promoted to Vice Admiral. Or he was promoted to Rear Admiral in 1801, retires in 1805, but is promoted to Vice Admiral on the retired list in 1806, and promoted to Admiral of the Blue in June 1814. So if I want someone to be my friend, I should kidnap them. I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not sure how it worked out that way for him. I really don't. Atron, I don't blame the Aussies for not being that bothered about the idea of Japan invading. Retreat and lose the emus for honourable combat with them. Lose the emus. Yeah, you don't. It's if you get past the river wildlife and the drop bears, you don't have the emus and the spiders. Yeah, no. Please note, this is a criteria for our trip to Australia, is hotels which have enhanced spider protection. I have no wish in finding out an Australian spider is doing a crouching tiger, hidden dragon on me in the middle of the night. Then we have John Hunter, who was also an able seaman in the 7 Years' War. Seems to be a good war for the Royal Navy in sort of growing itself up. Now, his governorship, well, Philip had left the colony in 1793 at the end of his term as governor, and for the following 2 years, the military, i.e. the New South Marine Corps, were in complete control. Francis Gross is described as unmercifully exploiting the convicts, carrying out a great traffic in alcohol spirits, and creating enormous profit for the officers concerned. They got control of the courts and the management of lands, public stores, and convict labour. Hunter, when he returned, realised these powers had to be restored to the civil administration, which was a difficult task. And in the person of John MacArthur, he had an opponent who would ruthlessly defend his commercial interests. So therefore, sort of as governor, found himself practically helpless. Now, if he'd sent the officers home under arrest, he probably would have faced a rebellion like William Blythe would face. And anonymous letters were even sent home charging Hunter with participation in very abuses he was striving to prevent. He was recalled because of these letters. By the Duke of Portland. Handing over government... and actually recalled for England on the 28th of September 1800, handing over the government to Lieutenant Governor Philip Gidley King. He then, when he returned home, attempted to vindicate his character with the authorities, but was given no opportunity. So he stated his case in a long pamphlet printed in 1802. Governor Hunter's remarks on the causes of colonial expense of the establishment of New South Wales, hints for reduction of such expense and for reforming the prevailing abuses. Now, at this point, you have to give him a bit of license, because he's probably overstating his case to make his case stronger. And then he... Well... To use the phrase of his successor, Philip Gidley King, his conduct was guided by the most upright intentions, and he was most shamefully deceived by those on whom he had every reason to depend for assistance, information, and advice. In fact, Hunter himself later remarked that he could not have had less comfort, although he would certainly have had greater peace of mind, had he spent his time in a penitentiary, and for his service as governor he was ultimately recognised through the grant of an annual pension of £300, approved by the Prime Minister of the time, Henry Addington, in October 1802. And when the platypus was first seen by Europeans in 1798, it was a pelt and a sketch by John Hunter that was sent back to the United Kingdom. In 1804, he was given command of the 74-gun HMS Venerable under the command of Admiral William Cornwallis. And, yeah. Sadly enough, Hunter twice narrowly avoided colliding over ships, but ran aground at 8 p.m. off the cliff at Paignton, and soon afterwards bilged. A gale then struck the area, and with Venerable fast going to pieces, her crew evacuated with little loss by HMS Impetrus. Hunter went through court-martial, was again fully acquitted, was promoted to Rear Admiral on the 2nd of October 1807, then to Vice Admiral in July 1810, but never hoisted his flag at sea, spending his final years in Leith, living at 6 Castles Place. Sad times. Nice, everyone. That's incredibly off topic. So when did Britain stop transportation? It depends on when you think, on what you think of transportation. How would it have gone if the emus were pro-Japanese? Oh, good lord, no. We're not getting into that. That's too scary. That's right, off topic. The UK losing World War I would not result in the UK monarchy, would it? As I'm pretty sure the US has an interest in the British Empire not losing to the cap in World War I. I'm trying to figure out a way, A, for Britain to lose World War I to the extent that Britain itself is threatened, and it would have to be a massive disaster for the Grand Fleet. An absolutely massive disaster for the Grand Fleet. And so you'd have to launch a amphibious invasion and take over Britain, and trust me, there's always an army sitting back in Britain in World War I. There is always an army sitting back in Britain as well as the Navy, so we get over that. So Britain would have to, for the royal family to be at any point at risk in Britain in World War I, you'd have to take the country. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out is one of the reasons we have so much information about this voyage, and things I can recommend you go read, is there's From a Convict, there's the memorandums of James Martin. There are journals by Arthur Bowes Smith, William Bradley, Ralph Clarke, David Collins, John Easty, John Hunter, Philip Gidley King, Jacob Nagle, Arthur Phillip, James Scott, Daniel Southwell, Watkin Attention, John White. So that's three of the first governors. Do actually write journals that you can read. James Scott, Daniel Southwell, Watkin Tension, John White. And letters, we can find copious letters from David Blackburn, James Campbell, John Campbell, Newton Fowle, Richard Johnson, Henry Waterhouse, and George Worgan. Plus, there are a fair number of individual sources from women who are involved in it as well. Now, while we're sort of considering that, one of the reasons why I do bring up Philip Gidley King is he goes out in he's appointed to replace Hunter as the third governor of New South Wales, becoming governor on 20th September 1800. He set about immediately changing the system of administration, appointing Major Joseph Forvaux as Lieutenant Governor of Norfolk Island. And he then started taking out the misconduct of officers of New South Wales Corps and their illicit trading in liquor and notably rum. He discouraged the importation of liquor and began to construct a brewery. However, the fact that the convicts refused to work in their own time for other forms of payment and the continued illicit local legislation were increasingly difficult to control. And there was also a problem of military arrogance and disobedience from the New South Wales Marine Corps, which were calling themselves more and more the New South Wales Corps rather than New South Wales Marines. When he sent John MacArthur back to face a court-martial, he didn't get much support in England either. However, he still had some successes. His regulations for prices, wages, hours of work, and deals, and employment of convicts brought some relief to smallholders, reduced the numbers on the stores. He encouraged construction of barracks, wharves, bridges, houses. Government flocks and herds greatly increased, and he also encouraged experiments with vines, tobacco, cotton, hemp, and indigo. Whaling and sealing became important sources of oil and skins, and coal mining began. He took an interest in education, established schools to teach convict boys to become skilled tradespeople, taking up in many ways where Philip had left off. He encouraged smallpox vaccinations, was sympathetic to missionaries, and tried to keep peace with the indigenous inhabitants. Had the printing of Australia's first book, the New South Wales General Standing Orders, and encouraged the first newspaper, the Sydney Gazette. His idea being that all these things would cause the army trouble, because if this New South Wales General Standing Orders is printed up and is in a book form and lots of people have a copy, then it's very difficult for you to start misrepresenting what your exact powers are, isn't it, Mr. Soldier? And the Sydney Gazette is, again, a useful thing, because if there's information going around... Also, on his time, settlements were established at Hobart and Port Dalrymple and Van Diemen's Land. Now, he was aware Sydney was a convict colony, and alert to the ebb and flow of the rebellious Irish political prisoners, he established his own bodyguard. This also helped him with dealing with the soldiery. Again, he had his own band who were personally loyal to him, which meant that getting a small group together, which certainly his predecessor had been at risk of, would be problematic, and the vast majority wouldn't side. He needed to buy time so the vast majority could respond if he was going to take on those soldiers. He gave opportunities to emancipists and maintained a rule that ex-convicts should not remain in disgrace forever. He appointed emancipists to positions of responsibility, regulated the position of assigned servants, and laid the foundation of the ticket to leave system for deserving prisoners, i.e. for you to be able to get home. He also allowed for a while Catholics, permitting Father James Dixon to say Mass for Irish convicts. Saying that, he also managed to directly profit from a number of commercial deals, cattle sales and land grants. He was modest in his dealings compared with his subordinates. And most famously, he did quell the Castle Hill Rebellion in March 1804. Here is the really fun thing. The New South Wales Corps causing trouble is what leads to his resignation and replacement with William Bligh in 1806, William Bligh, of course, in 18 then faces rebellion. And the thing about the rebellion is that whilst he loses, William Bligh has enough connections back at home that in the aftermath of the rebellion, everyone else gets into trouble with the establishment, gets taken home, gets cashiered. They're allowed to return to Australia, where they are now rich men, but the army is now fully under control of the civil administration, because all the officers who've been corrupt and who've been problematic have been got rid of. So, in other words, be careful who you wish for. The annoying, trying to keep you on the straight and narrow, but you can, to an extent, ignore and get away with some of the funding of a person, guy you get rid of, might be replaced by someone you can find easier to get rid of, but getting rid of that person could have consequences. Because trying to get rid of someone versus actually getting rid of someone and succeeding in rebellion is a different thing. Because if you succeed in rebellion, then the people back home have to take notice and have to see what you're doing. And you do not have enough soldiers and enough power to deal with them. It's a lot of history. And then we have some of the various Royal Marines. Now, one of them, Major Robert Ross, I do not have a picture of. But I thought you might want to see who the lovely people known as... And by the way, that's Lieutenant George Johnson, not Lieutenant David Collins. Again, this is the trouble. If I've had a full run through and recording, I would have noticed these things beforehand. And on the spot, I'd change it. That's George Johnson. I thought you'd like to see some of the Marines. Now, Robert Ross, unfortunately, is many things, but he is... How do I put this politely? He had served in the Marines from June 1756, being present at the siege of Louisbourg and the capture of Quebec during the 7 Years' War. He saw action at Bunker Hill in 1775. He was aboard Arden in August 1779 when it was captured and was taken prisoner by the French. In 1786, he volunteers for newly formed New South Wales Marine Corps and designated as commander with the brevet rank of major. Accompanied by his 8-year-old son, he sails for New South Wales on HMS Sirius, transferring to Scarborough during the voyage. From the very beginning, he's in conflict with Philip and officers. David Collins, this gentleman, the judge advocate, claimed an inexpressible hatred for him. Others described him at the time as, without exception, the most disagreeable commanding officer I ever knew. He refused to allow the Marines to supervise the convicts of work, or to allow Marine officers to sit as members of the criminal court. Which you can say is wrong, but also it does, in sense, keep the Marines separate. I.e., it stops the Marines viewing the convicts as their slaves or friends, and it also keeps him separate from the civilian powers. He criticised Philip for not building fortifications, and missed no opportunity to embarrass and try and hinder the governor. He did make it Philip's job more difficult. Philip therefore sent Ross to Norfolk Island in March 1790. Following the wreck of Sirius and the stranding of its crew on the island, Ross proclaimed martial law there for 4 months. He attempted to clear more land so the convicts could grow most of their own food, increase their discontent at the additional heavy workload. He quarrelled with his own officers, as vigorously as he had at Port Jackson, and was relieved, returning to Sydney in December 1791. In Sydney, Ross quarrelled and fought a duel with an officer of the newly arrived New South Wales Corps. Because remember, he was the New South Wales Marine Corps. When the New South Wales Corps turns up, their army. neither party being injured. On the 18th of December, the Marines are sent home. And they now the New South Wales Corps, when we talk about it, are not Marines, they're Army. And this is where some of the problems start to turn up for the Navy. Because Ross had kept things, and this is actually helpful. Yes, he'd been a problem, but it kept things sort of organised, that he hadn't wanted his officers to be part of the criminal court system, hadn't wanted his officers to be part of that. They had been there to defend the colony and to maintain order if the convicts proved problematic. So in 18th December, he departed with most of the Marines aboard HMS Gorgon. When he returns to England, his brevet rank of major wasn't confirmed, so he sort of goes back down to captain lieutenant and is removed from active command. He then serves as a Marines recruitment officer in St Albans and dies in June 1794. But he does get played by Joseph Milson in BBC Two's Banished, which was broadcast in 2015, which I am told you can find in various players around the world to watch if you want to watch an adaptation of this. And then we have our other officer, George Johnson. Now, in the centre, Johnston, when he arrived, served as adjutant to Arthur Phillip and was promoted in 1789 to the rank of Captain Lieutenant of Marines. He transferred from the New South Wales Marine Corps to the locally raised New South Wales Corps in 1791 with the rank of Captain. He received extensive land grants in modern Petersham, Bankstown and Cambrata. Also land which is now the current suburb of Annandale. Named for his property that was in turn named after the place of his birth. He and Esther Abrahams, who had been sent to Australia as a convict, and who became the de facto wife of him out there, lived on Annandale with their children. In September 1796, he was appointed aide-de-camp to Governor John Hunter, and 1800 received his brevet rank as major, and then was put under arrest by Lieutenant Governor William Patterson on charges of paying spirits to a sergeant as payout of his pay and disobedience of orders. Johnson objected to the trial by court-martial in the colony, and Hunter sent him to England. There, the difficulties of conducting a trial with witnesses in Australia led to the proceedings being dropped. Oh, that's so surprising. And Johnson returned to New South Wales in 1802. In 1803, he took temporary command on New South Wales Corps during the illness of Patterson, and became involved in the conflict between King and the military. King, of course, being Philip Gidley King, the third governor. In 1804, he acted with decision when in command of the military, sent some convicts who'd rebel when military which were sent to deal with the convicts who rebelled at Castle Hill. When Patterson was sent to Port Dalrymple, Johnson became commander, finally, officially of the New South Wales Corps. In 1808, Johnson played a key role in the only successful armed takeover of government in Australia's recorded history, the Rum Rebellion. Working closely with John MacArthur, he led troops that deposed Governor William Bligh, assumed the title of Lieutenant Governor, and illegally suspended the Judge Advocate and other officials. He was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel on 25th April 1808 and was superseded by his senior officer, John Joseph Fovereau, who was Lieutenant Governor of Norfolk Island on 20th of July. Johnson sailed for England with John MacArthur in 1809, and Henry Fulton as witness, and was tried by court-martial in 1811. They were found guilty of mutiny and sentenced to be cashiered. Now, what's interesting enough is that it's often considered that he was presumed to be the tool of other people rather than being the power himself. He was a bit of a strutting martinet, but yeah. He then returns to New South Wales as a private individual and married Esther Abrahams, who he had originally met on that transport on the transport Lady Penryn in 1787. And this is 1813 he finally officially marries her. So after being together for 26 years and they'd already had 7 children together. He died in 1823, much respected, apparently. And then we have David Collins, who is another Lieutenant Governor and is the first Judge Advocate. Now, after 3 years of half-pay stationed at Chatham, Collins volunteered for service in the proposed penal colony of New South Wales. And despite a lack of legal training, he was named Judge Advocate for the new colony, and Chief Judge for a military court administrating the New South Wales Marine Corps. In 1787, he sailed aboard the First Fleet, reaching Sydney Cove in January 1788. And when he's not there, Governor Phillip also appointed him as Secretary to the Governor, or Secretary to the Colony. The position seems to be called both things at different times. And therefore Collins filled the 3 roles of Secretary, Judge Advocate and Lieutenant Governor until he left the colony in 1796. He also established the first short-lived settlement in what is now the state of Victoria at Sullivan Bay in Port Phillip in 1803. He sailed from England in April aboard HMS Calcutta, arriving at Port Phillip in October to found a new penal colony there. After landing at Sullivan Bay near present-day Sorrento, he sent First Lieutenant James Hankston Tuckey of the Calcutta to explore Port Phillip. Tuckey's report and Collins' own dissatisfaction with the site chosen prompted him to write to Governor King, seeking permission to remove the settlement. King agreed, and Collins decided to move the colony to Derwent River on the island of Van Diemen's Land. And he established there what would later become the town of Hobart. Sadly enough, he leaves no published account of his works. And he got portrayed by David Dawson in the series Banished. Stafford Thompson logs in and goes, "Giant spiders, I am sending in the Space Marines." Oh, I do love Alive. Right, then we have the surgeon, John White, who I thought we'd talk about, and the Richard Johnson, the chaplain. And John White has, well, he qualified as a surgeon's mate in 1778 for an examination at the Company of Surgeons in London. He entered the Royal Navy on 26th of June 1778 as a surgeon's mate aboard HMS Wasp. He's promoted surgeon in 1780, serving aboard HMS Irresistible until 1786, when he is recommended by Sir Andrew Hammond, who was well, the governor of Nova Scotia from 1781 to 1782, and control of the Navy from 1794 to 1828, so kind of important, as principal naval surgeon for the voyage of the First Fleet to Australia. He joined the First Fleet in 1787 and found that the convicts had been living for some time on salt meat, which was, in his views, a bad preparation for a long voyage. He succeeded in obtaining supplies of fresh meat and vegetables for them, and arranged that they should be allowed up on deck in relays to obtain fresh air. On arrival in Australia, he has, of course, the medal made by Thomas Barrett. In 1788, White was appointed Surgeon General of New South Wales and organised a hospital for the new colony. Hampered by lack of medical supplies, he became interested in the native flora and fauna of the new land, investigating the potential of Australian plants for use as medicine. He observed the olfactory qualities of eucalyptus and distilled eucalyptus oil in 1788 and found that particularly useful. One of the interesting things is that, let's see, yeah. Right, so he has, I was just checking because a name turned up that I didn't recognise, but I wanted to check it in my notes and went, no, not one of the convicts. A journal of voyage to New South Wales was translated into German and French and included 65 copperplate engravings and panels, which were actually based on watercolouring paintings created by Sarah Stone from examples brought back. And in 1792, Thomas Watling, a convicted artist newly arrived in the colony, was appointed by the government to assist John White in the production of copies of illustrations of various plants, insects and animals, and also actually drew a picture of him as well, which you can see, which was sold at auction in December 2006. According to his journal, White really just didn't like Australia, describing it as a country and place so forbidding and so hateful as only to merit excretion and curses. He applied for a leave of absence in 1792, received it in 1794, and later travelled to Ireland. In 1796, he resigned his position when given the option to return to Australia, and was elected to the Linnean Society of London. He then served as a surgeon on HMS Royal William, and for 20 years was stationed first at Sheerness from 1799, and then at Chatham Dockyard from 1803. He retired on a half pension in 1820 and died in Worthing in England in 1832. Let's be honest, if you have the choice, really, would you pick Chatham, Sheerness, over Australia? I don't know. And then we have Johnson, the chaplain. Johnson was appointed chaplain, well, in 1786. They were appointed to take a chaplain with them in 1786 before they'd even actually got there. This was because John Newton and William Wilberforce were keen for a committed evangelical Christian to take the role of chaplain in the colony, because they wanted it to be the right sort of Christian. And so Johnson and his wife, Mary, sailed with the First Fleet and arrived in 1788. Now, in addition with providing for the spiritual life of convicts, soldiers, and settlers, he was also charged with providing education to the convicts. Now, He then got pretty annoyed with Arthur Phillip because Philip was not sufficiently concerned with providing labour to build the church because, well, he was focusing on finding the means of feeding and housing the soldiers and convict. Services were therefore held in the open air, and even 4 years later, when Johnson appealed to Phillip for churches at both Sydney and Parramatta, he had no success. Under Gross and Patterson, the lieutenant governors who assumed power, Johnson fared even worse. Gross actually making vague charges about him. He was given a grant of land where the suburb of Ashbury now stands, and worked it so successfully to help some of the convict labour that in 1790 Captain Tench called him the best farmer in the county. He planted seeds of oranges and lemons he'd obtained from Rio de Janeiro, which produced good crops of fruit, and occasionally references are found to his having made a fortune by his farming. That's unlikely, but you know. He sold his land and stock to good advantage when he left the colony, though, so he certainly made something. In 1789, Johnsons took into their home an indigenous girl, aged about 15, called Arabo or Borong, who had survived the smallpox outbreak. She learned English and Western customs and visited the Johnsons after returning to her own people. She does seem to have found them particularly quite nice and welcoming. In 1790, he and Mary had a daughter themselves, who was given the Aboriginal name Milba. They also had a son in 1792. Milba. In 1793, Johnson took care of, well, the Spanish expedition's chaplain. And in June 1793, he began to build a church himself, and by September, at a cost of about £67, completed a building capable of holding 500 people. The church was burnt down in 1798, which did not make Johnson very happy. They taught between 150 and 200 people, 150 and 200 school children in this church, as well as using it for a church. An assistant chaplain, the Reverend Samuel Marsden, was appointed in the same year and arrived early in 1794. And henceforth, Johnson found himself with a useful personality. Marsden is a very, very strong personality. Johnson is the right sort of Christian. Marsden is the sort of Christian who, if you try and ignore, will bring down hellfire and fury on you with words of power and very strong. You do not get it. There are many... Let's put it this way. There are kings who have said, will someone rid me of this bothersome priest? Marsden is the sort of priest who would get a king to say that. In 1800, he obtained leave of absence to visit England. He sailed on the Buffalo in October and did not return to Australia. In 1802, King in a dispatch said, I understand that the Reverend Mr. Johnson does not mean to return. Practically, he retired in 1802. But still in July 1805, he appears on list of officers on leave in England. No successor or second clergyman appointed. When he's in England, though, in about 1801, he takes up a curacy with the Reverend Thomas Dykes of St. John's, Kingston upon Hull. And he starts to train up William Cowper, who becomes the third chaplain to New South Wales. In 1803, he's curate at Bunwell in Norfolk. And then he's moved to West Thurrock in Essex in April 1809. In 1810, he's presented by the King to the United Parishes of St. Ophollian and St. John Baptist in London. He never served as a curate at Ingham, despite various people saying that. And, you know, he continued to take an interest in Australia, appearing before the House of Commons Select Committee on Transportation 1812 and 1815. He recommended John Yule to be the chaplain at Port Dalrymple. He died in March 1827. Yeah, I like Chatham. It's a lovely place. However, if I had to pick which one I would want to spend time in, I'd probably pick Australia. Because Chatham at this time was full of the industry of the Royal Navy being built. So it is very, very clogged. Agreed on Worthing. Also, Worthing has some excellent places to go for lunch. Really nice places for lunch. So, was the mission successful? Well, they established the colony. Was it the colony they wanted to establish? Not really, but it was a colony. They succeeded in getting it off the ground, in getting some organisation there. And that matters. That really does matter. But burned down in 1798. When was it completed? 1796, I think. But honestly, it's a long-term investment. We've been talking about investments 150 years in the making, in terms of ships, ships of the line, etc. That I was talking about on Tuesday's Long Patrol video. Well, think about this. They establish Australia. Yes, it's useful. Yes, it grows. Yes, it becomes more and more useful. As they invest in it, more and more comes out. But let's be honest, the really big payoff for Australia in terms of the British Empire doesn't come until, you can argue, until World War One. But in honesty, the really massive payoff for the British Empire, from Australia's perspective, from Britain's perspective on Australia, if you're looking at a long-term perspective as they would have, in terms of what they're thinking would be a payoff when they're establishing it in 1787, 88. That's the Second World War. When Australia anchors Britain in the Far East. Anchors the British Empire in the Far East. And honestly, Australia, as much as India with Burma, stops the Japanese pushing further into British territory. Which means the British don't have to deal with someone coming at the other side of the Suez Canal, or someone trying to get to them from the Indian Ocean. So you think about that. It was supposed to provide an asset against the French. Yeah, it did provide a bit of that. But realistically, you could say their investment in 1787 pays off most in 1941, 1942. Which is, broadly speaking, 160 years later. So about the same amount of time for payoff for planting an oak tree to build a strip of the line. But no. It's, broadly speaking, it is a success. It's a viable colony. And this is, broadly speaking, what is established. You can see they establish a farm, they establish gardens. You got the various islands shown there. You got where the ships were parked and positioned when they arrived. And Well, you've got their various postings all around the nice places where they are. It's a nice setup, and again, it's one of those interesting dichotomies you have really illustrated here. You have the Marines who don't want to be involved in politics and local government to the extent that it's problematic for the administration, which is a civilian administration headed by a naval officer. And yet, conversely, when a naval officer, when they change them over to the soldiers who do want to be getting involved in it, New South Wales Corps, who are raised for it, that then destabilizes it and ends up basically taking over the colony because they want to get so involved and they want to run it for their personal corruption. And you have to sit there and go, which is better? Because you have this sort of legacy view of Ross, especially, as being wanting to not be involved and being intransient and being problematic. But in many ways, as problematic and difficult as he was, you probably needed an officer halfway between the two. It's probably better having him than it was the officers who came after him. And it was really kind of an interesting scenario of, this is Britain's colony where they almost lost control because of the New South Wales Corps. They almost lose control. And the thing is, they bring down Bligh, and they're going, yeah, we're the big power, and then they get the messages from home. And yes, they get cashiered leniently and sent home nicely, but there's also a whole new branch of officers sent, a whole new branch of civil administrators sent, and very importantly, a whole new load of warships are put there. And the point is very much made, there are Marines as well as soldiers. And the Marines there are pretty much there honestly as, we are honestly here because if you New South Wales get out of hand, then we've got the backing of the ships and we've got enough guns, we can get the governor, etc. off, and you're going to be in trouble. It's almost something which runs away from Britain, and there is an amazing legacy of stuff learnt. When it's not theoretically learnt, but it is learnt. Going through it. I'm a few hours late and a few quid short, but I'm here and sort of awake. Honestly, Glyn, this whole story, this is something that he will know, but you possibly won't. But if you read his Peacekeepers of Soul books, you'll find reference to events in the past where one of the colonial administrators of Interplanetary Council and Humans had lost control of their formations and basically ended up fighting a war within the humanity because of it. This is a scenario where this is the sort of thing that how it could take place, because you change from the Marines who don't want to get involved in politics to the New South Wales Corps, who are very happy to get involved because they want to be part of everything, and then use it to try and make money. Not sure. I've only left the house to schlep to the mailbox. Yes. Working from home, or for lifestyle in snow. Yeah, there's a lot of snow. What are we doing to prepare for 150 to 160 years in the future? Those spiders are critically endangered, as Dan Reeves' response to Melanie. I am happy for them to become even more endangered if they get too close. Yeah, I have to admit, one of the things I think we're probably budgeting in our supplies for going to Australia is a lot of spider spray. Please, Australians, if you're watching this video, do write in exactly what brand is the best anti-spider spray and how much should we be carrying on us. We're not afraid of spiders. We're used to the British ones, which you basically can capture in your hand and chuck out a window. Or, you know, and sometimes I just balance on a finger and they'll just sit there while I pop them out a window. Not things which are mildly problematic. I know we do technically have a venomous spider in the UK, the widow, and the false widow as well. But, you know, then you just put them in. If you think you spot them, you just use a glass and piece of paper and, again, take them for a walk down the street. You would never, of course, take them just far enough down the street so that you can drop them off outside a neighbour who you find annoying in the road. Of course, you would never do that. Never do that. That's completely immoral. Especially as usually the neighbour you find probably annoying is probably the one next door to you. Yeah, Stafford, get your brakes fixed. Please do. Brakes, fix. Spider's a euphemism for birdshot. I don't think we're allowed to take shotguns through airport security anymore. As Melanie points out, 60 agree, as you point out, false widows tend not to be venomous and widows tend to keep themselves. That is true. However, again, I regularly go and stay in some random parts of the country. So, in certain parts of the UK, they are more common than others. And especially when you are sleeping outside, in tents. Then they can drop in because, as far as they're concerned, they're in the middle of their area, and you're the trespasser, and they've just dropped in on this thing which has appeared on their floor below them and looks kind of interesting. Fun fact, most European and British, for that matter, spiders you find in house main cobwebs cannot survive outside. Well, yeah. I was asking, my wife doesn't allow me for those kinds of pleasantries. I'm supposed to use slippers or a gazette and flush the water outwards. You're allowed to bring shotguns through airport security in the USA, just have to be in checked baggage. I remember that. But no. So, it's quite a nice, well-established, sensible-ish colony. Its legacy, well, as many things from colonization, is kind of... It's good if you're the British government, you're establishing somewhere. It's kind of a mixed blessing if... a mixture of issues. If you're Australian, looking back, it's probably not a particularly... Well, it depends on which governor you're talking about. Even then, it's not particularly present because for the Aborigines, etc., because ultimately it is people coming from outside and taking over land by force. And basically going, we're here, it's ours. It's the language of the time. Okay? It's not considered wrong at the time. But nowadays, looking back at it, it's not how we would prefer things to go about. But it happened, established the country, and it's a long time ago. Different governors had different techniques. As said, Philip is a kind of a mixed bag. Most of the governors come after him. The governors themselves tend to be okay. The lieutenant governors tend to be weird and wacky doodle. Take care, Roland. And there is a bit of heritage left around, but not that much. There's a commemoration garden. There is a park which is situated in the rocks near the site of the First Fleet's landing. It's remained in public ownership since 1788. It's previously used for a hospital, Queen's Wharf, shops and houses, the first commissariat store and the first post office. The commemoration garden was completed by Ray Collins, who hand-chiseled the names of all those who came to Australia on the 11 ships in 1788 on stone tablets along the garden pathways. It was opened in 2005. So I think of some of the memories, it's probably one of the better ones of the foundings. But it is a mixed bag, because it's one of those things about Australia, is its colonisation does start off with all this hope. And you have Philip with this plan of legal freedom and all these things, and the ability of convicts to sue an officer of the Crown, as he was appointed and serving at that time as captain of the ship in charge of them, for breaking the rules and stealing from them, is a novel thing and quite a good thing if we consider civil liberties, etc. But the fact is, what comes afterwards, especially once the New South Wales Marine Corps are replaced by the New South Wales Corps, is not particularly great. I say, everyone, I have no idea what you're talking about in terms of RTV-31 tracked hovercraft high-speed train. That sounds like a very weird combination to me. And if that had managed to work, I would be frankly amazed. But I doubt it existed, and I doubt it would have been successful to anyone trying it. Because that sounds like something which is pre-built to break if it works, if it is actually built. No, it was good. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed tonight's discussion. It's now 11:15, and it's later than I thought this was going to be a 3-hour video. It's turned into a 3 3/4 hour video. So, hope you enjoyed it. I thought it'd be a slight difference from technology and other things we talk about, but it's also quite interesting because it is sort of technology. It's about the need for supplies and resources, and when you're planning logistics around the world. It did actually exist. It did exist. Okay, I'm going to have... Night6831, send me the details on Discord. I will have to look that up. If that actually existed, I will have to look it up. Because, frankly, that sounds like someone's had a WET dream and had basically of words come out their mouth. Dodgy armed police sounds far too much like 1950 South in the US. Yeah, pretty much. It's not a good scenario. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, as what have we got next week? We have the Dragonfly class, another gunboat service in World War II, and then we'll also have the vote starting Sunday, and then we will have the 9th of February. Well, we'll have whatever Patron 72 is, and of course it's Brewships 100 on Sunday, this Sunday, and that's when we announcing the vote for the patron, and it will be a sci-fi one. Jack Ray, somehow I don't think spelling that out helps anything. I think it probably prevented YouTube from causing me any trouble. That will do, Night Cigarette, please do. That will do. Thank you, I will look into it. Apparently the link which Melanie6040 has just sent me. Oh my... Oh... I will have a look. I will look this up, but I have a feeling this is going to be something which is going to cause my blood pressure to rise. Right, thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn Stewart. Thank you, Melanie6040. Thank you, Jack Ray. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you... Stafford, I'm sure I said thank you, but I haven't. Thank you, everyone. Seneca Nero, thank you, everyone who's been on, who's been adminning. Thank you, Atris Verdun. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Discarry. Thank you, Inns. Thank you, Joss Vonk Bishron. Thank you, Machidoshel. Thank you, Carl Gasberg, of course. Thank you, Vushi. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tanif. Thank you, Albazaski. I'm trying to go through and make sure I don't miss anyone. Thank you, Richards. Thank you, Verdun. Thank you, Roland Cash. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you very much for watching. Thank us all. I do. Thank you, everyone. Take care.